American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 681-700. At that moment, the quick-reacting Rogel did not hesitate and drove his vibranium-powered armor, quickly reversing backwards. At the same time, the other 5 buzzing metal rings also swiftly cut through the snow-filled sky. They completely joined in the repeated bombardment and harassment of the massive Nurgle beast, attempting to draw its attention. By the time the repeatedly vomiting chief librarian managed to cleave the last bloodletter in half with his force staff, that Astartes named Silas, who was only wearing a scout armor, also relied on flexible and varied charging steps. And with extremely precise throwing skills, he fiercely threw the melt-a-bomb in his palm directly above the massive Nurgle beast's head. Rumble. In an instant, a dazzling light and terrifying high temperature that burst outwards instantly swept across a huge area within 100 meters. The violently expanding hot air and terrifying shockwave even cleared the cold wind and snow in the sky for a short time. As for that massive Nurgle beast, after taking the terrifying power of a melt-a-bomb head-on, in addition to a large amount of flesh and blood being evaporated on the spot, the remaining parts were blasted into pieces of charred wreckage that were burning violently, evenly scattered on the surrounding charred earth. Tylos, what special stuff did you add to the melt-a-bomb again? Why is the explosive power so much greater than I remember? At this moment, the chief librarian, kneeling on one knee, looked at the epicenter of the explosion with lingering fear, while scarlet blood kept flowing from the corner of his mouth as he roared in the direction of Silas. Then, he subconsciously turned his gaze and, after carefully observing Rogel, who was collecting the metal rings, with his psychic vision. The chief librarian's expression changed, and he didn't even care that strenuous exercise would aggravate the serious injuries in his body. He quickly activated his power armor, forcefully propping himself up with his force staff, and pounced towards Rogel's side. Chief Librarian Jonah Orion, mysterious mentor of the Blood Ravens chapter bearing the responsibility of commander, greets the Primarch. Chief Librarian Orion heavily knelt on one knee. A faint, sickly blush appeared on his pale face. He tried his best to open his eyes wide, and roared in a low voice filled with excitement and shock towards Rogel's tall back. And seeing the chief librarian's sudden respectful attitude, Silas, who subconsciously glanced at Rogel a few times, also knelt down on one knee hesitantly and said, "Silas, Scout Sergeant of the 10th Company of the Blood Ravens chapter, greets the Primarch." "Well, get up. I don't like people kneeling to me. You are the Blood Ravens chapter. I'm not very familiar with you. Do you still remember who your parent chapter is? Or remember your gene father?" At this moment, Rogel, who was slowly turning around while holding the Forgebreaker Warhammer in his palm, said in a deep voice. He stared at Chief Librarian Orion, who had a pale face, and Silas, who was clearly an Astartes veteran but was not wearing power armor. Then, with a calm expression, Rogel took out 2 panaceas from the storage space below his power pack and handed them to the 2 people in front of him respectively. "This is a panacea that can heal all injuries, you can use it to recover." At this moment, facing the gift from the Primarch, Chief Librarian Orion reached out and took it without hesitation. Then, he threw it into his mouth and swallowed it forcefully. And although Silas also raised his hand to take it, he did not take it immediately, but casually put it inside his scout armor. "Well, that's invigorating." Dozens of seconds later, Chief Librarian Orion, whose face gradually recovered from pale to ruddy, excitedly answered all the questions just now to Rogel. According to his understanding of the ancient history of the Blood Ravens chapter, even the chapter masters of the past cannot clearly state the specific origins of the chapter. It is only known that the entire chapter was established around M37. As for who their gene father is, it is even more unknown. But now that a Primarch has come here, if the Primarch is willing, the Blood Ravens chapter can completely become his gene sons. And as Chief Librarian Orion continued to speak, what was even more surprising was that the frozen planet where Rogel and the 2 of them were now located was actually the homeworld of the Blood Ravens chapter, Aurelia Prime. It was just that this planet was completely engulfed into the warp later, and only recently reappeared. And several combat squads, including Chief Librarian Orion and others, were the vanguard teams sent by the ship-based Blood Ravens chapter to investigate the situation of their homeworld. But for some reason, as soon as the group arrived here, they discovered that a large number of Chaos Demons and traitors of the Black Legion were rampaging repeatedly on the surface of the planet. Chief Librarian Orion and others not only unfortunately became separated from the other teams in the previous battles. Moreover, while trying to find their way, they were also unexpectedly ambushed by a group of Chaos Demons. Speaking of this, the excitement and joy on Chief Librarian Orion's face gradually disappeared. He took a deep breath fiercely. He lowered his head and admitted to Primarch Rogel that there were major errors in his orders and command. This led to the death of more than a dozen battle brothers on the spot. However, at this time, before Rogel could speak, Silas, who had pondered for a moment, seemed to have finally made a decision. He first casually comforted Chief Librarian Orion a few words, and then changed the subject. Silas solemnly spoke to Chief Librarian and Primarch Rogel about some of his findings. He unilaterally believed that the separation of all combat squads and the subsequent ambush by Chaos Demons was because someone deliberately leaked information about the Blood Ravens chapter's battle style and battle plans to the enemy. Because their number of librarian formations far exceeds other chapters, so often before any action, they would first use psychic powers to make predictions and arrange various plans. But in the battles experienced after stepping on the homeworld, the degree of attacks by Chaos and traitors on the librarian units far exceeded everyone's imagination, as if they were deliberately targeting everything of the Blood Ravens chapter. However, Silas, who chose to confess frankly now, did not have any decisive evidence. He only made reasonable guesses and judgments based on the intuition he had honed through countless battles, large and small. In response, Rogel, who had pondered slightly, neither agreed too much nor objected out loud. After all, this level of accusation is quite serious in the Astartes chapter, and even if he is a Primarch, he needs to treat it with caution. So, after the tense atmosphere, everyone checked the situation on the battlefield again. Rogel and the Chief Librarian drove their power armor. Under Silas's lead, they walked towards a place where they could hide their tall figures and avoid the wind and snow. From the storage interface, Rogar took out some food supplies and shared them with Orion and Silas. After everyone had eaten and drunk their fill, Rogar, who had been contemplating with his head lowered, had somewhat of a draft for the next course of action. In any case, the Chaos enemies on this planet needed to be eliminated. Therefore, they had to gather as many of the surviving Blood Raven Astartes as possible. As for how to distinguish who was the unfortunate fallen Chaos traitor, it would probably still require Rogar, the Primarch, to personally discern. Thus, Chief Librarian Orion and Silas once again took up the storm bolters and vibranium power swords that Rogar had gifted them. They followed their Primarch and quickly stepped out of their hiding place. Braving the relentless wind and snow, they sped off in the direction where they had been scattered by the Chaos enemies. Soon after, Silas, who was diligently listening to the chapter's communication channel, suddenly stepped forward and quickly said to Rogar's tall figure. An indistinct distress signal was repeatedly playing on the communication channel. And if he wasn't mistaken, that location wasn't too far from their current position, and he asked whether they should investigate it. Rogar had no objections to this, as this was originally their current objective. Hearing Rogar's reply, Silas immediately pinpointed the exact location of the distress signal and personally led the group, quickening their pace in the designated direction. About 20 minutes later, the edges of a base filled with abandoned buildings slowly came into view, revealing three tall figures. The low roars of bloodletters also constantly entered their ears through the biting cold wind. Dong, dong, dong. At this moment, Rogar, gripping the Forgebreaker Warhammer and the blood scythe in his hands, acted as the spearhead of the entire combat squad, launching a terrifying and awe-inspiring charge towards the abandoned base. Chief Librarian Orion, wielding a two-handed power staff, followed closely behind, with waves of intense psychic energy constantly brewing on his body. As for Silas, who wasn't wearing power armor, he chose a higher vantage point, slowly raising the Mark II sniper rifle in his hands to provide long-range support for Rogar and the others. Rumble. The sprinting tall figures seemed to emit a rumbling sound like an iron train. Bloodletters wielding hellblades were forcibly knocked away by Rogar's terrifying charge. The two melee weapons he gripped in his hands danced back and forth. A dozen bloodletters that had just gotten close were completely smashed into scattered pieces of flesh. At the same time, bolts of lightning-like psychic energy and psychic flames hot enough to evaporate large amounts of ice, snow, and flesh continuously erupted from Chief Librarian Orion's hands, relentlessly bombarding the numerous bloodletters. Now that the continuous drag of his internal injuries was gone, Chief Librarian, skilled in psychic arts, could truly unleash the powerful might of his role as a walking artillery platform. While Rogar and Chief Librarian Orion were charging back and forth across the battlefield, slaughtering enemies. Streams of incredibly precise sniper beams also suddenly streaked across the snowy sky. They continuously landed on some bloodletters with very tricky attack angles. Obviously, Silas, as a scout sergeant, also had many unique skills. Even without the aid of a power armor's optics, he could achieve true bullseye accuracy. Soon after, as the last bloodletter, bearing its fangs and claws, had its head smashed by Rogar's Forgebreaker Warhammer. The entire battlefield, littered with broken corpses, almost instantly fell silent. Chief Librarian Orion, slowly exhaling a breath of air, began to activate his power armor to scout around. In the end, he found Techmarine Martellus, whose power armor was covered in scars. At this moment, the silent Techmarine was casually thrown on top of several broken corpses of Blood-Raven Astartes. If it weren't for the life detection system inside the power armor confirming that he wasn't dead, but had only entered a state of suspended animation, then the Chief Librarian would have thought that he had completely lost his vital signs. Rogar, driving his vibranium power armor, came nearby and once again took out a panacea and handed it to the Chief Librarian, who quickly stuffed it into the Techmarine's mouth. When Silas, who was at the edge of the battlefield, arrived at this place, the Techmarine, who was slowly exhaling wisps of hot air from his mouth and nose, suddenly opened his eyes. However, unexpectedly, the first thing Techmarine Martellus did when he saw them was to tell them that they needed to retreat immediately. Because the Chaos Demons were using the Blood Ravens chapter's communication channel to send out distress signals, luring in those Astartes who came to rescue them. This undoubtedly indirectly corroborated the fact that there were indeed fallen traitorous forces within the Blood Ravens chapter. However, after he regained his somewhat bewildered senses, Chief Librarian Orion, who had just exchanged a glance with the Primarch, said some comforting words that completely relaxed the Techmarine, who had been tensed up. Subsequently, Techmarine Martellus knelt on one knee towards the Primarch in front of him with a solemn expression. And after he received the special treatment of being personally helped up by Rogar, the Primarch's orders and requests slowly fell into his ears. Rogar needed the Techmarine to find a way to repair some of the functions of the vibranium power armor. Even if he couldn't repair everything, it would at least be much better than it was now. Thus, the group immediately found a building ruin around the battlefield that could provide shelter from the wind and snow and was easy to defend and difficult to attack, using it as a temporary rest stop. While Techmarine Martellus was manipulating the servitor mechanical arm that could still be used to detach the vibranium power armor from Rogar's tall body. The armor shell material and some of the servomotor structures that he had never seen before caused the Techmarine to repeatedly make sounds of admiration. In the interval while the Techmarine was diligently repairing the vibranium power armor, Rogar, who was sharing food, inadvertently asked Silas. Why was he only wearing a set of scout armor, regardless of the combat ability he had shown or his years of service? He should be qualified to wear Terminator armor in the Blood Ravens chapter, right? At this moment, facing the Primarch's question, Silas, who was eating, smiled very rarely. He leaned slightly closer to Rogar and lowered his voice, saying, he, the scout sergeant, was responsible for training the chapter's recruits who had just completed surgery, and needed to hone the recruits into true Astartes. And Silas had served in the Deathwatch for a period of time. Having experienced various cruel battlefields, he had gradually developed a set of special tactics and combat styles that were completely different from the Blood Ravens chapter. Even if the others in the chapter scoffed at Silas's unconventional tactics, as long as Silas chose to become a scout sergeant and never got promoted. Then, after several centuries, all the Astartes of the Blood Ravens chapter would learn and even master Silas's tactical style. And he didn't even need to obtain the support or approval of the chapter master or anyone else. Just as the three people around were discussing their next course of action, Rorschach, who possessed beast-like senses and hearing and smell far surpassing ordinary Astartes, suddenly turned his head. His subtle movement quickly alerted the chief librarian, Orion, and Silas, who had been paying close attention to the Primarch. Even Tech Marine Martellus, who was not far away and was repairing his vibranium power armor with servo arms, frowned and sped up his movements. The next second, Rorschach, clutching the blood scythe and the forge breaker warhammer, stood up wearing only a wolf pelt cloak. He continued to listen to the wind and snow outside the building, then suddenly turned to Silas, who was standing beside him, and said, "I don't smell the stench of chaos demons, nor do I sense the fluctuations of chaos psychic energy. Judging from the number of those approaching and the length of their strides, it should be a group of Astartes. Silas, go scout ahead. If you find that they are our own men from the chapter and are sure there is no danger, bring them over. If you vaguely sense something is wrong, use gunfire to signal us, and we will be ready to send them on their way." As soon as Rorschach finished speaking, Silas nodded slowly and quickly strode away, carrying his sniper rifle as he rushed out of the ruins of the building. After the other's tall figure completely disappeared into the depths of the snowstorm, Rorschach, with a calm expression, and Chief Librarian Orion, clutching his power staff, were clearly ready to launch a surprise attack. Dong, dong, dong. Before long, a series of crisp sounds of magnetic boots stepping on thick snow. "Safe, our own men." And Silas's low voice gradually echoed in Rorschach's ears. Rorschach narrowed his eyes and subconsciously exchanged a glance with Chief Librarian Orion. Then, he carried his two melee weapons and slowly walked out of the ruins of the building. At this moment, in the midst of the swirling snowstorm, 11 blood ravens in blood-red power armor, led by Silas himself, slowly stopped their advance and were fully revealed within Rorschach's field of vision. Gabriel Angelos, captain of the 3rd Company of the Blood Ravens chapter, greets you, Primarch. The next moment, among the crowd, an Astartes standing at the front of the group, holding a huge warhammer, only glanced at Rorschach. Taking a deep breath, he heavily activated his power armor and knelt on one knee, offering a loyal greeting to the Primarch in front of him. At the same time, the other Astartes knelt on one knee without any hesitation, and their voices were low as they roared in unison. "Greetings, Primarch." At this moment, Rorschach took a deep breath with a calm expression. He nodded slightly, raised his hand to beckon everyone to get up from the ground, and then, under everyone's gaze, turned and returned to the ruins of the building behind him. Dozens of seconds later, Gabriel, the captain of the 3rd Company, under the guidance of Silas, entered the interior of the building for the first time and came to Rorschach's side. At this moment, Captain Gabriel, with a slightly excited expression between his eyebrows, nodded to Chief Librarian Orion, and began to face the detailed inquiries from the Primarch. Captain Gabriel also told Rorschach about their previous series of combat experiences without any concealment. After being separated from all the other teams, they did indeed receive a distress signal from this place by accident, and then quickly set off to come here. But before coming here, Captain Gabriel had just led a Blood Ravens combat squad in a small contact skirmish with Aligastor, a Chaos Lord of the Black Legion known as the Houndmaster. If there were no unexpected circumstances, it was this hateful traitor who presided over the chaos invasion of this icy planet. However, after exchanging trash talk with the other party for a while, Captain Gabriel vaguely noticed something was wrong through some signs. Combined with the many dangerous encounters of the Blood Ravens before, Captain Gabriel had to make a logical analysis and judgment. That is, there is probably a fallen split force within the Blood Ravens chapter, and it has also come into contact with the Chaos side. Otherwise, the well-prepared Blood Ravens vanguard troops would not have suffered such heavy losses on this planet. At this moment, Rorschach, with slightly raised eyebrows, slowly exhaled. He expressed his agreement with Captain Gabriel's calm judgment. At the same time, he also told the other party without concealment that they had also noticed the existence of traitors. However, Rorschach changed the subject and continued to say to Captain Gabriel, "Now is not the best time to solve the internal problems of the Blood Ravens chapter. The current goal of everyone is to completely eliminate the Houndmaster from the Black Legion, which is the primary task." In this regard, Captain Gabriel, after thinking for a while, finally agreed with the Primarch's idea. So, for the next period of time, while the vibranium power armor was still under repair, Rorschach began to gradually extract some heavy firepower weapons from the storage page. And under the almost worshipful gaze of the people around him, he distributed many weapons and equipment such as large-caliber assault cannons, whirlwind missile launchers, and storm bolters to all the Blood Ravens Astartes one by one. Moreover, if the Blood Ravens had not clearly stated that they did not have any special experience in operating heavy vehicles, Rorschach even planned to bring out the volcano cannon installed on the vehicle chassis. Finally, Chief Librarian Orion carefully suggested to Rorschach that in order to prevent the Chaos Traders from being on guard against this, it would be better to take out strategic weapons of the volcano cannon level when the battle reaches a critical juncture. Soon after, Tech Marine Martellus, with a look of exhaustion and excitement, slowly came to Rorschach. He said that he had done his best to successfully repair most of the vibranium power armor. Although it was still not possible to fully restore all the functions of the vibranium power armor, it should be enough to cope with the arduous battle ahead. So, Rorschach, who had re-equipped his power armor, performed some tentative joint movements back and forth. He tightly held his two melee weapons, and reappeared in front of everyone in his complete Primarch form. Blood Ravens, are you ready? I am not your Gene Father, but as your Primarch, I can assure you that before I fall completely, I will stand at the forefront and lead you to kill all the enemies who have betrayed the Emperor and even threatened the human empire. Now, let us take up the weapons in our hands and personally bring the Emperor's wrath down upon the heads of our enemies. For the Emperor, knowledge is power. For the Primarch, as the battle roars used to boost morale dissipated into the cold air, the pensive and deliberate Loxia simply divided everyone into two combat squads. The combat squad, led by 3rd Company Captain Gabriel and Cyrus, would carry all the whirlwind missile launchers and heavy firepower weapons as remote fire support and a flanking ambush team. The combat squad, led by Loxia and Chief Librarian Orion, would become the main force attracting the enemy's attention. In the next moment, the fully prepared group braved the raging wind and snow, embarking on the road to beheading the Reaver Lord Aragast. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, in the Blood Raven's long silent battle group communication channel, a voice, vaguely low and confirmed to be from Blood Raven's chapter master Kiras, slowly transmitted. However, after everyone subconsciously stopped advancing and listened attentively for a few sentences, even Loxia couldn't help but frown. Because the other party came up and forcefully ordered all surviving Blood Ravens to abandon all current missions and plans. Prepare to board several Thunderhawk transports that had just landed on the surface to return to the chapter's flagship. However, when the indifferent Chief Librarian Orion first accessed the communication channel and hinted to the chapter master about the existence of the Primarch, the other party, who had been very tough, suddenly cut off all communication channel signals and fell into complete silence. At this moment, Loxia, who had been listening intently, couldn't help but reveal a fleeting sneer from the corner of his mouth. He had already guessed something from the other party's strange behavior. After the Blood Ravens present looked at each other, they almost came to the same thought and idea as Loxia. That is, Blood Ravens chapter master Kiras may have committed an unforgivable act of corruption. Fortunately, in the end, Loxia, as the Primarch, refocused everyone's attention on the beheading mission in front of them, and continued to set off towards the target location. About a dozen hours later, after a long trek, Loxia and the Blood Ravens braved the raging snow flying back and forth in the sky and arrived at a mountainous area dotted with a large number of ancient fortress ruins. According to Chief Librarian Orion's slow narration, Loxia then learned that this place was once the monastery fortress belonging to the Blood Ravens chapter. This place not only trained countless brave and fearless Astartes, but also gave birth to more than one chapter master who was infinitely loyal to the Emperor. It's just that now, this place has become the home of Chaos Traders, and the chapter master, who should have been loved by many battle brothers, is also involved in the suspicion of depravity and corruption. And when the surrounding Blood Ravens began to inspect the weapons and equipment on their bodies on the spot, at the same time, when they were recovering their strength and replenishing energy as soon as possible, Loxia, who was squinting and constantly looking at the surrounding mountains, suddenly raised his hand and beckoned in the direction of Cyrus. The other party, who was swallowing a protein energy bar, immediately understood and stood up, carrying his sniper rifle and quickly sneaking towards the ancient monastery fortress. Only a few tens of minutes later, Cyrus, covered in cold snowflakes and with a slightly dignified expression, reappeared in everyone's sight. After returning to the temporary camp, he immediately found Loxia, who was discussing the battle plan with Gabriel and Orion, and replied in a low voice. Primarch, the reconnaissance mission is complete. I risked exposure and tried to sneak deeper into the fortress monastery. Through my careful observation, I found that there were no less than 1,000 chaos worshippers inside, as well as more chaos demons, mainly bloodletters and plaguebearers. In addition, there are also several chaos Astartes squads from the Black Legion. Although I didn't see the figure of the beheading target, the current situation is not something that our small number of people can easily deal with. Based on my combat experience, if we want to achieve the final victory, then we must find the beheading target and make a quick decision. The longer the time drags on, I'm afraid it will be more beneficial to the chaos enemies. At this moment, as soon as Cyrus finished speaking, before Loxia could speak, 3rd Company Captain Gabriel, whose expression remained solemn, nodded and said, "It's a pity that the real situation now does not allow us to mobilize more Astartes. Otherwise, with the remaining manpower of our 3rd Company, we can greatly increase the chances of victory. Moreover, even if we can contact the flagship now, I don't think Chapter Master Kiras will necessarily stand on our side. Brothers, no matter what, this battle is one that we must fight. However, the changes in the battlefield situation cannot allow us to charge head-on at the enemy in the same way as in the past. Our current advantage is that the enemy has not yet learned of our movements, and before my stored ammunition is completely exhausted, the remote firepower we have can be said to be endless. Come on, Blood Raven's battle brothers, let us give these chaos traitors a storm baptism belonging to whirlwind missiles." Loxia, taking a deep breath, paced back and forth, driving the adamantium power armor. He turned his head and glanced at the Blood Ravens standing around, and said in a deep voice. And as soon as Loxia's voice fell, as his palm waved, hundreds of whirlwind missile launchers were quickly extracted out of thin air. Even because too many were extracted in a short period of time. A large number of whirlwind missile launchers were almost completely piled up on the thick snow within a radius of tens of meters. Soon after, every Blood Raven Astartes quickly took action. They carefully deployed the whirlwind missile launchers around the rugged mountains where the entire fortress monastery was located. And in order to achieve the necessary confusion and fire bombardment effect. Basically, every whirlwind missile launcher has been modified by Cyrus and Techmarine Gartler, changing the independent launch mode to a remote-controlled series connection. After nearly 1,000 whirlwind missile launchers were almost spread over several steep mountain tops. Along with the order personally issued by Primarch Loxia resounding in everyone's team communication channel. Chi. A large number of whirlwind missiles, whistling and roaring, even vaguely covering the raging cold wind. With a dense number that covered the sky and the sun, they launched a terrifying fire bombardment towards the fortress monastery located on another mountain peak. Rumble. In an instant, countless ancient fortresses that were already dilapidated were instantly shrouded in continuous explosions of fire. In addition to many buildings collapsing on the spot, more debris and broken walls also quickly fell down the steep rock walls one after another. At the same time, angry roars from a large number of chaos demons, and the excited shouts of chaos worshippers, echoed almost instantly around them. The continuous sound even directly caused the snow on the surrounding peaks to collapse, forming terrifying avalanches that flowed wildly like raging rivers. However, before all the whirlwind missiles were completely launched, Rorschach and the Blood Ravens, having anticipated this situation, had already hidden in the depths of a cave and had no intention of risking exposure. They had to minimize the number of enemies as much as possible through continuous bombardment. Only then could the tide of victory in the entire battle gradually and completely turn in their favor. Rumble. Along with the thunderous explosion of each whirlwind missile, countless bloodletters waving hellblades and plaguebearers staggering around were exposed inside more collapsed buildings. And for these chaos demons who had lost the shelter of buildings, they undoubtedly became the best flesh and blood targets for the whirlwind missiles. Even if a whirlwind missile did not directly hit its target, it was difficult to completely kill a flailing chaos demon with the aftershock of the explosion. But facing the continuous bombardment that almost enveloped the entire fortress monastery, Any Chaos Demon exposed outside would eventually be unable to escape death. Rumble. Before long, many Chaos worshippers who were frantically cursing and roaring outwards, trying to find traces of the enemy, also became victims of this man-made disaster. Their mutated flesh bodies, which were weaker than those of Chaos Demons, were either torn into pieces on the spot by the explosive power of whirlwind missiles, or they were completely crushed into flat meat patties by collapsing rocks that crashed down from the sky. But in a place that no one noticed. A large amount of fragmented flesh and blood and scarlet blood from Chaos worshippers and Chaos Demons were quickly absorbed into the ruined floor of the entire fortress monastery without leaving a single drop. About 10 minutes later, when the last whirlwind missile suddenly streaked across the half-sky where the fierce wind and snow had temporarily disappeared, and crashed heavily into the burning ruins of the monastery. At this moment, Rorschach, wearing Terminator armor and wielding the Crackdahelm Warhammer and the blood scythe in his hands, immediately led the fully armed blood raven Astartes out of the cave entrance buried by snow. Everyone moved their magnetic boots at top speed, sprinting towards the entrance of the monastery ruins. Pung pung pung. Just then, as soon as the group stepped into the ruined entrance of the monastery, several Chaos Astartes in black power armor with traces of fragmentation all over their ceramite shells suddenly revealed their tall figures from behind cover. Constantly shouting and cursing, they pulled the triggers of their bolters, unleashing a continuous barrage of bolter fire at Rorschach, the most conspicuous target in the team. However, Rorschach, who didn't care about ordinary attacks at all, only raised a thick arm to slightly shield the position of his head without a skull helmet. In the next second, his entire tall body, enduring the bolter fire that never stopped for a moment, quickly approached these Chaos Astartes. Chi. As the sharp edge of the blood scythe, filled with a green glow, suddenly slashed across the air. A Chaos Astartes hiding behind cover, unable to retreat a few steps in time, was instantly and swiftly cut into pieces of flesh and blood that fell heavily to the ground by the cold-faced Rorschach, along with a large piece of the building cover. At the same time, in front of another piece of cover, a terrifying psychic lightning bolt from Chief Librarian Orion suddenly bloomed in the cold air, continuously striking the tall bodies of the Chaos Astartes. And the Chaos Astartes, enduring the psychic damage and having just drawn his close combat weapon, had not yet launched an attack. When 3rd Company Captain Gabriel, driving his power armor and holding a heavy warhammer tightly in his palm, hammered down hard on top of his metal helmet. Boom! Along with the fragments of the exploding metal helmet and the steaming flesh and brains, a headless, tall corpse fell heavily backwards. But just when the blood ravens were about to go deep into the battlefield in one go, the Chaos Astartes, whose numbers had obviously not decreased, revealed their looming tall figures in the depths of the raging fire. An increasingly dense barrage of bolter fire also exploded around the blood ravens. Several blood ravens holding assault cannons or storm bolters. Instead of choosing cover to hide, they charged forward, only managing to pull the triggers a few times before being pierced through the visor position of their metal helmets by extremely precise bolters. In an instant, their tall bodies paused abruptly. Then the whole person fell heavily backwards onto the ground. Find cover, advance step by step. Don't expect to end the battle in one go. Rorschach was waving the blood scythe and the Crackdahelm Warhammer at a charging Chaos Astartes. He noticed the meaningless death and sacrifice of his blood raven brothers with the corner of his eye. So, Rorschach roared without turning his head while hacking at the enemy in front of him who had no power to fight back. Then, he suddenly turned his cold gaze, as he clenched his two close combat weapons and continued to swing forward. Metal sigillite rings filled with purple light had already suddenly streaked across the air, carrying a terrifying hum, and slammed into the Chaos Astartes team not far away. Ding ding ding. In an instant, along with a series of extremely heavy footsteps and whistling wind, an ancient Terminator armor wearing black paint, a tall figure holding a power sword with a red light blooming on its blade and a combi flamer in each palm crashed down in front of the Chaos Astartes fighting team. The other party only waved the power sword blooming with red light back and forth a few times in midair. And the metal sigillite rings carrying a terrifying impact force were blasted away. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne. Ha ha ha, look what this is, a damn corpse emperor lapdog. Your skull has brought me the opportunity to ascend to demonhood. Now, your enemy is me, the champion of Khorne, the Reaver Lord of the Black Legion, Alagast. At this moment, Alagast, whose dark metal helmet emitted a deep roar, shouted with incomparable excitement. In the next second, he suddenly activated the ancient Terminator armor and charged madly towards Rorschach without any hesitation. Pung! Rorschach, who casually ended a Chaos Astartes with the Cracktahelm Warhammer, also took a deep breath. He slightly widened his bloodshot scarlet eyes. And his tall body, with blood gradually boiling, slowly activated the adamantium power armor. The whole person charged head-on towards the opponent without any intention of dodging. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. The ancient ground around the two towering figures continuously cracked, emitting an extremely terrifying, low rumble. Rokas, clad in light gold power armor, clashed violently with Aragast, clad in black Terminator armor, like a golden lightning bolt. Instantly, visible shockwaves sprayed out from between the heavy shoulder pads of both combatants, scattering into the frigid air. The intense sound of the collision momentarily overshadowed the nearby, incessant roar of bolters. The next moment, inside both Rokas's vibranium power armor and his opponent's black Terminator armor, a piercing hum of numerous servo motors arose almost simultaneously. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At this moment, the physical strength of a Primarch, surpassing that of ordinary Astartes, forced Aragast, champion of Khorne, to stagger backward a few steps. The blood scythe, held tightly in Rokas's hand, slashed through the air. The verdant, shimmering, sharp edge had already deeply embedded itself in the opponent's heavy shoulder armor, cutting into the flesh of chaos. However, just as Rokas was about to forcefully drag the blood scythe, and simultaneously raise the breaker of Forge's Warhammer in his other hand to cleanly end the battle. Roar! Aragast, having just suffered severe injuries, suddenly emitted a deafening roar from within his metal helmet. The blood-light power sword in his hand abruptly rose, choosing to forcefully block the blood scythe that was being dragged. At the same time, even as Aragast endured the immense pain of having half his shoulder continuously torn by the blood scythe's sharp edge, he swiftly raised the combi flamer held tightly in his gauntlet, and, disregarding the breaker of Forge's Warhammer about to fall on his metal helmet, violently pulled the trigger. Churr, churr, churr. In an instant, a terrifyingly hot flame, capable of melting metal and flesh, erupted violently from the combi flamer's narrow nozzle. In a flash of lightning, Rokas, whose bronze face instantly reddened and cracked, reacted with unparalleled speed. He decisively abandoned his attack aimed at the top of the opponent's metal helmet, and released his massive hand gripping the blood scythe. His magnetic boots instantly stomped on the ground, executing a shadow step, completely transforming his towering body into wisps of dark shadow. After narrowly avoiding the face-melting crisis from the terrifyingly hot flames, Rokas, his pair of magnetic boots landing heavily, reappeared behind Aragast. Bang! However, just as Rokas swiftly activated his vibranium power armor to turn around, intending to deliver a fatal blow to his nearby opponent, a massive fireball, formed from a large amount of coalesced chaos warp energy, slammed head-on towards Rokas. This forced him to forcefully raise the breaker of Forge's Warhammer, violently sweeping it across the massive fireball's trajectory. At the same time, Aragast seized the opportunity to quickly move his magnetic boots, successfully creating some distance from Rokas. He unhesitatingly discarded the blood-light power sword he had been holding tightly in his gauntlet. And even before the power sword could firmly embed itself deep into the ground, he swiftly raised his hand to grasp the blood scythe's cold metal hilt, forcibly pulling the sharp edge embedded in his body. At this moment, Aragast felt the injuries within his body rapidly healing. He couldn't help but let out a low, ferocious laugh from within his metal helmet. Next, the opponent, after casually discarding the blood scythe, used both massive hands to pull back and forth on the rear of the Terminator armor a few times. Two lightning claws, with azure disintegration fields constantly blooming above their claw tips, were suddenly attached to the thick arms encased in ceramide armor. You dare to call yourself a champion of Khorne? I've never seen a Khorne champion who dabbles in psychic sorcery. Aren't you afraid your master will send someone to smite you? At this moment, Rokas slowly activated his vibranium power armor, passing through the wisps of dissipating chaos warp flame in the scorching air. He felt the cracking burns on his bronze face continuously healing, and opened his mouth to sarcastically mock. Clearly, this Lord of the Black Legion was not so pure and unwavering in his evil faith in Khorne. After all, a Khorne champion who secretly uses psychic sorcery can be said to be the shame and laughingstock of all Khorne champions. Unfortunately, facing Rokas's mockery, Aragast, wielding the lightning claws in both hands, didn't reveal too many thoughts. The victor is king. The blood god doesn't care how I win your skull. As soon as his voice fell, the opponent violently activated his Terminator armor. Once again, he launched an astonishing combat charge towards Rokas in front. Thump, thump, thump. Rokas, his expression growing increasingly cold, slightly twisted his neck. He subconsciously tightened his grip on the breaker of Forge's Warhammer, which constantly bloomed with strands of lightning. Subsequently, he unhesitatingly executed continuous shadow steps. His towering body, completely shrouded in dark shadow, was like an elusive, intangible phantom. He continuously circled around the approaching Aragast, unleashing a series of astonishingly powerful hammer strikes. Boom! The breaker of Forge's Warhammer, carrying blooming lightning snakes, slashed through the air, heavily landing on the back of Aragast's spine. With just one strike, it forcefully smashed a large, collapsed, terrifying dent into the Terminator armor's ceramite shell. Before Aragast, who had suddenly bent over, could rise and forcefully swing his lightning claws to capture Rokas's attack trajectory. Rokas's towering body, shrouded in dark shadow, swiftly reappeared in another blind spot that the opponent couldn't detect. The breaker of Forge's Warhammer, held tightly in his hand, once again fell on the front of Aragast's chest. The next moment, accompanied by a terrifying roar that echoed all around. Fatal hammer strikes, each one more powerful than the last, continuously landed all over Aragast's body. Thump! When Rokas, gripping the breaker of Forge's Warhammer in both hands, suddenly stopped executing shadow steps. The vibranium power armor, entwined with dark shadows, was completely revealed in the frigid air. At this moment, Aragast, the champion of Khorne who seemed to be even more skilled in using psychic sorcery and offensive tactics. His entire towering body had already collapsed heavily onto the ground like a pile of human-shaped sludge mixed with broken armor parts. The next moment, Rokas, without any emotional fluctuations, activated his vibranium power armor and stepped forward. The breaker of Forge's Warhammer, which suddenly slashed through the air, carrying wisps of blooming lightning snakes, completely smashed the opponent's entire head. With the demise of Alagast, the Lord of the Marauders and an unworthy champion of Khorne, the Chaos Astartes who were fighting and killing the Blood Raven Astartes in the monastery ruins nearby clearly showed a sign of retreat. Unfortunately, due to the presence of the Primarch, the Blood Ravens, whose fighting will was much firmer than before, were desperately holding onto these Chaos Astartes to prevent them from retreating. At this moment, Gabriel, the captain of the Third Company, also wielding a heavy warhammer in his palm, and Chief Librarian Oriel and the others were like fearless killing machines. With a combat squad of fewer than 10 people, they gradually surrounded the Chaos Astartes, whose numbers were several times greater than theirs. When Loxia, who had picked up the blood scythe from the ground again, drove the adamantium power armor and launched a terrifying charge towards the encirclement like a steel train. A large number of Chaos Astartes, who could only take one blow from the Primarch head-on, gradually became the souls of the Blood Ravens. However, just as Loxia and the Blood Ravens were trying their best to wipe out the Chaos Traitors, on the broken ground within a few kilometers, the Chaos Astartes who had lost their voices and Alagast who had no head. The cold blood that was flowing freely around them and the broken flesh that was splashing everywhere were slowly absorbed into the ground covered with ashes and snow again. About a few minutes later, when the last Chaos Astartes who tried to fight back, was instantly split in two at the waist by Loxia's blood scythe, and half of his body fell heavily to the ground. This Chaos Astartes, who seemed to be Alagast's second in command, suddenly propped up his half-body with incomplete internal organs with a ferocious expression. He stared at Loxia, who had an indifferent expression, and the Blood Ravens, who had cold expressions, with blood-red eyes, and roared in a hoarse voice. "Hounds of the Corpse Emperor! I'll see how you deal with the Great Unclean One." Uakir, heed our agreement and sacrifice. Nurgle's great demon, who has been dormant for countless years, immediately break the ancient seal here and revive. At this moment, as the other party's almost wailing roar continued to drift around, the broken upper body of this chaos Astartes suddenly exploded into strands of sticky blood that did not fall to the ground, and then quickly condensed into the air. Immediately afterwards, before Loxia and the others, who subconsciously widened their eyes, could take the necessary countermeasures. Chi. More sticky blood and stinky flesh that had been absorbed into the ground below in advance suddenly appeared on the ground like a blood-colored storm that erupted suddenly, and then quickly gathered into the air, completely turning into a large mass of wriggling flesh. Rumble. The next second, a blood-colored hurricane with extremely strong impact force, mixed with a strong stench that seemed to penetrate deep into the soul, swept rapidly towards Loxia and the others. The blood ravens, who had no time to make a defensive posture, were suddenly blown backwards like light human-shaped toys, and fell heavily onto the surrounding hard ground in the blink of an eye. Even Loxia, who reacted quickly, suddenly drove the adamantium power armor and stomped heavily on the ground. At the same time, he also forcibly inserted the blood scythe in his palm into the depths of the ground. His entire tall body was also blown backwards by this continuous blood-colored hurricane for hundreds of meters before barely stopping. Oh, long-lost fresh meat, bones full of chaos power, bile containing the smell of death, what a delicious sacrifice. In an instant, the huge mass of flesh wriggling back and forth in the air suddenly tore open from the middle. A terrifying figure with an incomparably huge body and a swollen, rounded green surface almost covered with pustules and potholes first landed heavily, and then shook its ugly head with a pair of twisted horns slightly. With a face full of intoxication, it subconsciously twitched its nostrils covered with a large amount of stinky mucus, and murmured in a low voice. Tisk. Most importantly, although a little guy who reached a sacrifice agreement with me unfortunately died in battle, a Primarch who is highly valued by the Father and eager to obtain just happened to fall within my field of vision. Hello, little brother, why don't you just kneel down to me happily? As long as you are willing to submit, the Father's entire family will always be willing to open its warm and broad embrace to welcome you to join. The great unclean one's voice kept echoing in the surrounding foul air. Loxia, who had a faint golden blood flowing from the corner of his mouth, drove the adamantium power armor and slowly stood up from the ground. His cold gaze stared intently at the great unclean one, whose huge body was like a green mountain of flesh, not far away. The blood scythe and the Ruinbringer Warhammer, which he had been holding tightly in his palm, disappeared into his palm again out of thin air. Uakir, right, have you been sealed for too long and your brain is completely muddled? Speaking of which, I not only have some grudges with your brother Kugath, but also have an irreconcilable hatred with Typhus, the real master of the Death Guard. In this case, I'm afraid your green family will definitely not welcome me. Of course, the most important thing is one thing, and that is that you Nurgle demons are so damn stinky, I really can't stand it. At this moment, as soon as Loxia's voice fell, with his suddenly raised thick arm forward, Winter. In an instant, a brute pattern volcano cannon mounted on the chassis of a heavy vehicle suddenly appeared in front of him. The extremely heavy metal tracks forcibly crushed the surrounding ground, and also firmly aimed the black muzzle of the volcano cannon at the direction of the Great Unclean One. The next second, Loxia, with an even more ferocious expression, did not let the Great Unclean One, who let out an angry roar, completely react. His magnetic boots quickly stepped on the heavy armor of the heavy vehicle chassis, and the whole person jumped directly to the rear of the volcano cannon. Then, Loxia activated the launch device of the brute pattern volcano cannon without any hesitation. Rumble, along with a roar that resounded throughout the surroundings, like thunder. A beam of incandescent light as thick as a mortal's body suddenly cut through the cold air. It slammed hard on the Great Unclean One Uakir's huge body, which was like a green mountain of flesh. With the continuous output of terrifying energy, the Great Unclean One Uakir, who had no time to dodge or defend, was almost instantly completely penetrated by this incandescent beam of light through his entire huge body. Even more terrifyingly powerful scorching energy even frantically escaped outwards from the other party's eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Roar. Rumble. The scorching air vibrated incessantly, and all the ice and snow within a kilometer radius were completely melted by the terrifying high temperature into scalding rainwater scattered everywhere, pattering onto the ground. Even some of the monastery ruins that had survived the bombardment of the whirlwind missile began to collapse and fall one after another, making deafening roars. About tens of seconds later, the blazing white beam, about the thickness of a mortal's body, had completely annihilated the great unclean one, Ukale, in the distance, leaving no trace of its existence. If it weren't for the heavy, fishy stench still lingering in the surrounding air, no one would have believed that a great unclean one of Nurgle had just appeared in this place. Hiss hiss hiss. At this moment, as the large barrel of the bellicose pattern volcano cannon repeatedly discharged cooling mist into the surroundings. Reluctantly using his tall body to withstand the powerful recoil and high-temperature steam of the volcano cannon, Rorschach couldn't help but kneel on one knee, instinctively letting out a burst of violent panting. And with the rapid operation of the medical life support system inside the power armor, the remaining liquefied panacea was slowly injected into his body, beginning to quickly repair all injuries. Thump thump thump. Almost at the same time, the Blood Angels Astartes, who had just been violently blown away by the Crimson Gale, immediately drove their power armor, which was scarred with ceramite plating, and quickly traversed a large number of building ruins, arriving around the heavy chassis of the volcano cannon. They carefully raised their thick arms, cautiously helping Rorschach, whose injuries were recovering, to the ground. Once Rorschach's two magnetic boots had completely landed on the ground, he took a deep breath and narrowed his eyes, scanning the Blood Angels' brothers who had survived the battle. A raised adamantium palm heavily patted the thick shoulder armor of each Blood Angels, making a dull metallic clanging sound. Next, Rorschach ordered Cyrus, who was not badly injured, and Chief Librarian Oriel and others to re-examine the traces on the battlefield, to prevent any survivors from the Chaos side from being left behind, allowing the Chaos demons to make a comeback once again. Afterward, while the others had the Tech Marines repair their power armor, they discussed the next course of action with Rorschach. If there were no unexpected circumstances, then the current chapter master of the Blood Angels chapter, Librarian Kiraz, must have been corrupted by Chaos. However, the problem now is that they still do not know how many Blood Angels brothers have become his accomplices, choosing to fall with him. Moreover, there must be some battle brothers among them who remain completely unaware because they trust the chapter master and the chapter's orders. How to quickly distinguish the good guys from the bad guys has become the first problem they face. However, Rorschach, who was pondering with his head down, also proposed his own idea to Gabriel and others. That is, he intends to forcibly suppress all orders from Blood Angels chapter master Kiraz in the identity of a Primarch. After all, according to the tradition of the Astartes chapter, as long as the Battle Brothers are still loyal to the Emperor and the Imperium, they will definitely not attack a Primarch. As for those Battle Brothers who have been completely corrupted, or are overly loyal to Chapter Master Kiraz himself, then Rorschach can only say sorry. And when Rorschach's voice slowly fell, the Blood Angels, who had looked at each other, had no objections. Firstly, the Blood Angels, who had a Primarch for the first time, believed that Rorschach's orders must be carried out, even if it meant everyone's death. Secondly, these people actually had no better way. Because once the news that Blood Angels chapter master Kiraz had been corrupted by Chaos was accidentally spread. No matter how much connections the Blood Angels chapter had cultivated and accumulated in the surrounding star sectors and within the Inquisition in the past, a crusade of atonement involving the survival of the entire chapter is simply unavoidable. And if they listen to the Primarch's plan, they may be able to keep the scale of this civil war within the chapter. Even if the news is unfortunately leaked in the future, then the Blood Angels chapter, with the support of the Primarch, can openly face the Inquisition's questioning. After several hours of rest and repairs, Rorschach and the Blood Angels, who had reactivated their power armor, became busy once again. They need to find a way to leave this planet before the entire fleet of the Blood Angels chapter truly arrives. Then, using Rorschach's Primarch identity, they will pull the vast majority of Battle Brothers who have been kept in the dark into their own camp in advance. Only in this way can they have the confidence and strength to completely confront the fallen chapter master Kiraz at the final moment. Not long after, through Cyrus's in-depth understanding of the chapter's communication channels, The other party successfully captured a newly opened communication route and also successfully learned the parking position of the Stormraven transport. He even learned from the private conversations of other battle brothers that Gabriel and Oriel had been declared traitors of the chapter by Chapter Master Kiraz. Subsequently, Rorschach and the Blood Angels quickly stepped into the snow-filled skies and began a special operation to seize the flying vehicles. A few hours later, around a newly opened parking platform, the Astartes, personally led by Primarch Rorschach, quickly controlled 3 Stormraven transports that had not yet taken off. Even the dozen or so battle brothers responsible for guarding the flying vehicles were completely shocked by the battle aura constantly emitted by the Primarch, and only fired a few bolter rounds before stopping their attack and counterattack. And after Gabriel and Chief Librarian Oriel solemnly explained the arrival of the Primarch and the issue of the chapter master's corruption to the Blood Angels brothers in front of them, these loyal Blood Angels Astartes quickly knelt on one knee to Rorschach and stood on the side of the Imperium. In fact, even these ordinary Blood Angels battle brothers had more or less suspected Chapter Master Kiraz's recent series of abnormal orders and behaviors. After all, a librarian who originally possessed a large amount of psychic knowledge suddenly became irritable and easily angered in his actions, and also became insidious and vicious in his dealings with people. If it could still be barely explained as a personality defect before, then when the Primarch truly appeared, this fragile veil shrouded in layers of lies was completely shattered. Boom boom boom. Along with the roar from the displacement engine, 3 Stormraven transports carrying all the combat personnel quickly rose into the dim sky, still filled with wind and snow. In the next second, each Stormraven transport that crossed the thick clouds flew to completely different routes and directions in the cold void. Captain Gabriel of the 3rd Company was going to their company's strike cruiser, personally breaking the vicious lies of Chapter Master Kiraz, summoning the remaining battle brothers to join this internal battle against the chapter's traitors. As for Cyrus and Tech Marine Matrius, who had not exposed their identities, they needed to board the Stormraven transport and wait for the right opportunity to return to the battle barge, Omniscient Mystery, which served as both a fortress monastery and a flagship, specially responsible for secretly monitoring any movements of Chapter Master Kiraz. And Chief Librarian Oriel planned to lead Primarch Rorschach on a Stormraven transport directly to a space hulk called Corpse Judgment, to find Captain Apollon Diomedes of the Honor Guard, who could completely control the veterans of the 1st Company of the Blood Angels chapter. If the other party had been corrupted by Kiraz or was too loyal to Chapter Master himself, then the Primarch would need to kill the other party on the spot. If the other party could still be saved and was willing to offer loyalty to the Primarch, then the complete defection of the Honor Guard captain would also allow the vast majority of Blood Angels brothers within the chapter to stand on their side without bloodshed, which would undoubtedly greatly reduce the obstacles and combat difficulty of eliminating Chapter Master Kiraz. Generally speaking, an Adeptus Astartes chapter faces incredibly complex and difficult war situations, especially the Aurelia sub-sector after the opening of the Great Rift. The Tyrannid swarms raging everywhere and the opportunistic orc hordes are also quite troublesome alien races for the Imperial forces. Not to mention that this sub-sector also hides an Eldar craftworld. Therefore, the area where the Space Hulk, Corpse Judgment, exists often becomes an important location coveted by every alien race. The Tyrannids can use autonomously drifting Space Hulks to conceal the true traces of the Tyrannid fleet, becoming a springboard and means of concealment for invading other life-bearing planets. The Orc hordes can also salvage a large number of valuable resources and human technology from Space Hulks, and even have their Meekboys modify Space Hulks into super battleships that only Orcs can use. As for those mysterious Eldar craft worlds, no one knows what they are doing or what their purpose is. However, Rorschach had previously learned from Gabriel by chance. These pointy-eared craftworld Eldar were the first to vaguely reveal the signs of Chapter Master Kiraz's corruption to him. However, after learning about this, the heavy-hearted Gabriel mercilessly sent those craftworld Eldar on their way without showing any mercy. Boom boom boom. Inside the icy void, the Thunderhawk transport, carrying only Rorschach and the Chief Librarian, slowly arrived at the Space Hulk that had just fallen into the hands of the Blood Ravens chapter. And after Chief Librarian Orion secretly contacted Captain Diomedes of the Honor Guard in a private capacity, in just a few minutes, Rorschach, who was standing near an entrance of the Space Hulk, looking around, saw a tall figure rushing out from inside the Hulk in a fit of anger. However, the unfamiliar Astartes, who was struggling to drive his red-painted Terminator armor, was stunned for a moment when he got close. Then, without any hesitation, he stepped forward, knelt on one knee in the direction of Rorschach, and issued a deafening and loyal greeting. Blood Ravens Chapter, Captain Apollo Diomedes of the Honor Guard, greets the Primarch. At this moment, Rorschach, his eyebrows twitching slightly, subconsciously exchanged a glance with Chief Librarian Orion beside him. After confirming that the other party had not revealed the arrival of the Primarch in advance, he immediately drove his Oromite power armor and walked up to him. "Rise, battle brother of the Blood Ravens. I am not your gene father, and there is no close blood connection between you and me, so how did you recognize me as the Primarch at first glance?" Rorschach, with a calm expression, looked down at the captain of the Honor Guard, who slowly raised his face. One of his Oromite hands had subconsciously pressed against the heart of the forge on his waist, as if he would draw his gun and shoot the other party in the next second. "Primarch, perhaps you have forgotten, but before I became an Astartes of the Blood Ravens chapter, before I became an angel belonging to the Emperor, I, as a child, happened to see the great scene of you personally leading a group of Terminator guards to descend on my homeworld. It was your heroic fighting stance back then that made me more determined to become a powerful Astartes, otherwise, I am afraid that I would have found it difficult to persevere through those dangerous physical modification surgeries," Diomedes said in a low voice to Rorschach in front of him with a solemn expression. Rorschach, his brows furrowed, recalled it slightly, and chose to give up thinking completely. After all, he had previously led the Carcharodons and the Terminator guards to descend on a large number of planets to provide prayer support. Perhaps the Astartes in front of him was one of the mortal children he had rescued. And this kind of thing is not uncommon even in the Imperium of Man. Not to mention Rorschach, who can travel through time and space. So, Rorschach, as the Primarch, began a more detailed conversation with the captain of the Honor Guard, who got up from the ground. In fact, Diomedes at this time still doesn't quite believe the rumors that Chapter Master Kiras has been corrupted by chaos. He rushed here alone in a fit of anger because Chief Librarian Orion was identified as a traitor to the chapter by the Chapter Master. He planned to confront Chief Librarian Orion face to face. If it was just a huge misunderstanding, then he could temporarily take in or let go of Chief Librarian Orion, and then plead with the Chapter Master. If the other party really became a traitor, then Diomedes, as the captain of the Honor Guard, would naturally be able to deal with a battle brother who was a librarian. However, after Diomedes personally learned the truth from the Primarch that Chapter Master Kiras was indeed corrupted by chaos, the anger that was originally contained in his brows gradually calmed down, and he even began to reflect on whether he was too blindly confident because he was loyal to the Chapter Master. In this regard, Rorschach first praised and affirmed the other party's loyalty and style of doing things as the Primarch, and then also used rhetoric to point all the spearheads directly at Chapter Master Kiras himself. In the end, Captain Diomedes of the Honor Guard, after thinking for a while with his head down, said that he was willing to help the Primarch and the Chief Librarian to deal with the corrupted Chapter Master. However, just as Rorschach and others entered the interior of the Space Hulk, when they were planning to meet with dozens of veteran First Company Terminators under Diomedes, a secret psychic communication from inside the battle barge flagship, Omniscient Mystery, suddenly contacted Chief Librarian Orion. And after the other party, whose psychic fluctuations were surging all over his body, received all the psychic information, he immediately said to Primarch Rorschach with a solemn expression. According to the intelligence information collected by Silas and others, the damned Chapter Master Kiras actually lured an Inquisitor belonging to the Inquisition from other subsectors. And once the inquisitorial fleet he brought discovers that the chaos corruption of the entire Aurelia subsector cannot be suppressed, or even if the Inquisitor thinks so unilaterally, the entire fleet will completely release the Exterminatus order on all planets. If I didn't guess wrong, your damned Chapter Master Kiras is probably trying to use the Inquisition fleet's indiscriminate subsector Exterminatus order to carry out a super large-scale sacrifice ritual to the Chaos Gods with hundreds of billions of mortal lives. At this moment, Rorschach, who had only pondered for a moment, slowly let out a low sneer from his mouth. It seems that he had already noticed the arrival of me, the Primarch, and he probably thinks that he can't hide it anymore, so we don't have time to take our time and win over the rest of the people. We must immediately carry out a decapitation operation and directly extinguish the source of this disaster. Diomedes, do you and your Terminator veterans dare to take a trip with me and launch a boarding action against your Blood Ravens chapter flagship? Hearing the question from the Primarch, Captain Diomedes of the Honor Guard and the 30-odd Terminator veterans behind him stepped forward without any hesitation, driving their Terminator armor. Knowledge is power, we are willing to serve the Primarch. In the next moment, Rorschach, his expression gradually solemn, nodded heavily to everyone. He continued to turn his head and said, "Very good. Chief Librarian Orion, you immediately use psychic communication and shipboard communication equipment to broadcast continuously on the entire sub-sector channel, telling everyone, including the Inquisitorial fleet and the Chaos Traders, that a lost Primarch of the Emperor has arrived. They either kneel down and offer their loyalty, or they wait for my scythe and Warhammer." In the depths of the frigid void, a small and exquisite Cobra-class destroyer was speeding towards the direction of Aurelia Prime. Before long, a massive strike cruiser, leading several escort frigates, joined the Cobra-class destroyer, forming a small fleet. After this small fleet had been traveling for some time, they successfully arrived in the Aurelia system, already enveloped by the warp storms. In the chaotic, frigid void ahead, ships belonging to the Blood Ravens chapter were already blocking the small fleet's path. However, what was even more astonishing was that, just as the weapon arrays of all ships were gradually deployed and void shields manifested, among these dozens of ships of varying sizes, except for the battle barge, Omniscient Mystery, which served as both flagship and monastery, remaining motionless. The remaining ships rapidly charged forward, without any hesitation, converging around the small fleet. Subsequently, all the ships abruptly changed direction, aiming their weapon arrays at the battle barge. In the next moment, accompanied by the booming laser beams and brilliant lance strikes erupting within the frigid void, a large number of boarding assault boats and boarding torpedoes, braving the dense and terrifying network of fire, launched a boarding action against the Blood Ravens battle barge. Chi. Extremely hot melta beams penetrated the ship's external heavy armor and adamantium skeleton. A boarding assault boat slammed heavily into a vulnerable spot on the battle barge, beneath the bridge. Thump thump thump. As soon as the assault boat came to a stop, the heavy hatch rapidly burst open and flew outwards. One by one, Terminator veterans wielding storm bolters, like humanoid tanks, charged out from the depths of the assault boat. Immediately following, a tall figure wielding a blood scythe and a power fist, clad in power armor tinged with faint gold, entered the interior of the battle barge. Scanning the surrounding environment, Roel, gripping his melee weapons, waved his palm forward. These Terminator veterans from the Blood Ravens 1st Company, led by Honor Guard Captain Diomedes, began a relentless advance into the wide corridor ahead. And as the storm bolters in the palms of the squad constantly roared, every mortal crewman wielding a laser weapon and attempting to resist was instantly blasted into a rain of flying flesh and blood. Currently, the Chapter Master's all-channel broadcast was continuously looping towards any ship and planet. Those combat personnel who could still take up arms to resist were either corrupted by chaos, or there was no other excuse. Boom boom boom. Just then, deep within the corridor ahead, a dozen Blood Ravens brothers clad in red power armor appeared within the squad's sight. Before the bolters in their palms could be raised to fire, Roel abruptly activated his power armor. Wielding the melee weapons in his palms, he swung towards the enemies ahead. In an instant, these Astartes corrupted by Chapter Master Kiras were either focused down by the Terminator veterans' terrifying firepower, or their entire bodies, power armor included, were cleaved in two by the Primarch. And as the mangled corpses heavily crashed onto the metal floor, the Terminator Decapitation Squad, with Roel as its spearhead, launched an even more rapid and fierce assault into the depths of the battle barge. Soon after, a communication from Cyrus rapidly transmitted to Roel's ears. Chapter Master Kiras was attempting to lead a portion of the corrupted Blood Ravens brothers to open a warp gate and escape the battle barge. However, he was stalled within the ship by other loyalist squads who launched boarding actions, at the cost of their lives. Thus, Roel, with a grim expression, quickly disengaged from the Terminator squad. Alone, he began a swift and frenzied sprint towards the location of Chapter Master Kira's. Thump thump thump. At the same time, inside an ancient hall where chaotic warp energy permeated the air. Scattered across the metal floor were the mangled corpses of Blood Raven's brothers. Among them were both corrupted Chaos Astartes and self-sacrificing loyalist Blood Ravens. And Chief Librarian Oriel, already heavily wounded, was doing his utmost. Gritting his teeth, he unleashed terrifying psychic sorceries at a tall figure clad in ancient Terminator armor, wreathed in a large amount of chaotic warp energy. However, the demon weapon wielded in the opponent's palm easily tore apart many psychic sorceries in midair, completely nullifying them before him. At the same time, even more vicious chaos sorceries were continuously bombarding Third Company Captain Gabriel's tall frame, preventing the opponent, wielding a heavy thunder hammer, from approaching. Pathetic Blood Ravens, you people have always been unable to see clearly the path beneath your feet, and I, this chapter master, clearly found a costless path for you, yet I still have to suffer your merciless betrayal. However, it doesn't matter, the warp storms from the great blood god have already enveloped the entire Aurelia system, and that Inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus has always been filled with malice towards the Blood Ravens chapter's actions. I only need to slightly guide the other party, and these steadfastly faithful madmen will not hesitate to unleash an exterminatus. And I will, under the gaze of all of you, use the deaths and wails of countless living beings to become the most powerful demon prince under the banner of the blood god. At this moment, Chapter Master Kira's frenzied words continuously echoed in the surrounding air. Just as the opponent was planning to unleash even more powerful chaos psychic sorceries. To completely kill Chief Librarian Oriel and Gabriel, who were still struggling to hold on, before him. Buzz buzz buzz. A series of metal decimus rings, wrapped in terrifying buzzing, suddenly streaked across the air, heavily bombarding Kira's Terminator armor like missiles. Want to ascend to demonhood? Ask me, this Primarch, first. In the next second, a tall figure wielding a scythe and a hammer, like a golden lightning bolt, rapidly charged into the interior of the ancient hall. And as the distance between the two sides closed, a power fist radiating strands of lightning brutally slammed into the front of Chapter Master Kira's heavy chestplate, completely blasting the entire person backwards. Immediately following, Roel, with an indifferent expression, did not hesitate to unleash Shadow Step. His entire being, like a shadowy wraith, continued to launch an even more fatal and fierce assault towards Chapter Master Kira's, who had yet to land. Chi chi chi. In an instant, the blood scythe, wreathed in green light, was rapidly wielded by Roel into a dazzling light that was difficult to discern with the naked eye. The sharp edge also continuously cleaved at Chapter Master Kira's thick limbs encased in ceramide armor, scattering severed limbs and arms onto the surrounding floor. And as the opponent's remaining torso heavily landed on the ground, before the opponent, with a ferocious expression, could let out an angry roar. A terrifying thunder hammer, wrapped in strands of lightning, had already brutally slashed through the air. Without any intention of showing mercy, it hammered down upon Chapter Master Kira's head. Rumble. With the breaker's hammer, dazzling lightning snakes bloomed forth. His entire head shattered instantly. A surge of chaotic psychic energy, brewing for a long time, quickly dissipated into the surrounding air. At this moment, the corrupted Blood Raven's Chapter Master, Kira's, died a frustrating death inside the battle barge. As Luo Sha, standing in place, slowly exhaled, Kira's ultimate ambition to ascend to demonhood through the Extinction Edict was shattered. In fact, even if Chapter Master Kira's had completed the ascension ritual and successfully become a demon prince, he would not have been the most powerful demon prince under Khorne's command, and would even have become a target in the eyes of some terrifying beings. After all, a psyker-proficient librarian who actually worshipped the blood god would undoubtedly cause a certain schemer to lose all face. Even if the planner didn't care, his bird-like minions would come looking for amusement. Dong, dong, dong. At that moment, Luo Sha, taking a deep breath, drove his power armor and strode to face Chief Librarian Orin and Gabriel. After confirming that they could continue fighting, Luo Sha immediately led the two and other combat squads to regroup. They completely cleared the remaining resistance on the battle barge. Soon after this short but brutal civil war, the Blood Angels Astartes, with only 200 members remaining, gathered on the battle barge and knelt before Luo Sha, symbolizing their loyalty. Subsequently, Luo Sha, who had completely taken command of the Blood Ravens chapter, gradually became busy. Although the chaos-corrupted chapter master Kiraz was dead, the series of consequences he had caused were rapidly spreading. The first and foremost was the Inquisition from the Inquisition. With the rapid dissipation of the warp storm, the entire Aurelia sub-sector was now heavily surrounded by the Inquisition's massive fleet. According to the broadcast communication from that Inquisitor, if the Blood Ravens chapter's fleet made any unusual movements, the Inquisition's fleet would not hesitate to implement the annihilation plan. In response, Luo Sha first communicated with the other party in the identity of a Primarch. After successfully gaining a certain degree of trust, he led Chief Librarian Orin, Third Company Captain Gabriel, and others to personally meet with the Inquisitor of the Inquisition. To some extent, the Inquisitors with the most extreme styles were the most loyal to the Emperor. Therefore, when Luo Sha, wearing golden power armor, revealed his tall figure in front of the other party, the Inquisitor, who had originally doubted the Primarch's identity, immediately became Luo Sha's most steadfast supporter. This undoubtedly eased the tense relationship between the Blood Ravens chapter and the Inquisition, and even gave them a chance to continue negotiations. However, even if Luo Sha, in the identity of a Primarch, ordered this Inquisitor to abandon the subsequent investigation into the Blood Ravens chapter, the devout believer became even more determined in his position. Because, according to imperial law and the Inquisition's past handling of Astartes chapters, the Blood Ravens chapter, which had shown signs of corruption, must be sentenced to a 200-year-long penitent crusade. Of course, in order to uphold the dignity and command of the Primarch. This loyal Inquisitor also made a certain degree of concession. That was, the starting time of this penitent crusade could be judged by the Primarch himself. Even if it was delayed for hundreds of years, the Inquisition could pretend to be ignorant. At this point, all judgment regarding the Blood Ravens chapter temporarily came to an end. On the battle barge, Omniscient Mystery. Inside the ancient hall, which was still being repaired by a large number of mortal servants, all the Blood Ravens Astartes were silently watching the Primarch in front. At this moment, Luo Sha, with a calm expression, glanced around at the crowd. He announced on the spot that Third Company Captain Gabriel would be promoted to the new chapter master of the Blood Ravens chapter. Subsequently, Luo Sha, who had briefly held a chapter master investiture ceremony, slowly said to the Blood Ravens brothers present, in order to avoid the so-called penitent crusade, and also to increase the combat strength under his command, he would lead the entire Blood Ravens fleet to more difficult wars on future battlefields. If anyone was unwilling to go, they could explain the situation to him in advance. The Blood Ravens fleet would leave behind the necessary gene seed and some ships for the other party before leaving. In this regard, the Blood Ravens present had almost no objections. Even though Luo Sha had explained some of the difficult situations on the future battlefield to everyone, no Blood Ravens brother had ever intended to retreat. After all, being able to personally follow a Primarch to continue fighting, for any Astartes chapter, it was a supreme symbol of honor. Therefore, in the next period of time, the entire Blood Ravens fleet gradually prepared for the plan to go to the future battlefield, and at the same time tried its best to create a stable living environment in the surrounding star region in the short term. Luo Sha, led by the new chapter master Gabriel, also began to conduct an in-depth understanding of the Blood Ravens chapter. They first visited the equipment display room inside the battle barge, which was as numerous as a cow's hair. One by one, weapons and equipment that once belonged to various chapters and imperial forces were slowly revealed in front of Luo Sha. Even those demonic weapons belonging to the chaos gods and psychic knowledge that could be called forbidden. The Blood Ravens also placed them separately in secret rooms with heavy seals. At this point, Luo Sha, who couldn't help but widen his eyes, finally knew why the chapter master of the Blood Ravens chapter would be corrupted by chaos. Because they would gather all the spoils or psychic knowledge collected through various means on the battle barge, Omniscient Mystery. If the Blood Ravens chapter still had a homeworld, it would undoubtedly be a pastime in addition to fighting. After all, similar sealed secret rooms were often far away from where the Astartes were located. But as a fleet-based chapter, the Blood Ravens, It can be said that they stayed with a large number of demonic weapons and alien weapons and psychic knowledge of unknown origin every day. It was a miracle that they had not been completely corrupted now. In this regard, Luo Sha, with a slightly headache, put forward an idea to Chapter Master Gabriel. He would not make any mandatory orders or measures on the Blood Ravens chapter's style and special hobbies in the identity of a Primarch. After all, even he himself would try to collect various precious things. But from now on, any demonic weapons and psychic knowledge involving chaos need to be transferred to a transport ship. And the Blood Ravens need to place large-scale psychic seals on the entire ship, and at the same time build a large number of Emperor statues and prayer scriptures inside. According to Luo Sha's method, although it could not completely cut off the source of depravity and corruption, but it would also greatly reduce the chances of these Blood Ravens, who were better at using librarians, from repeating the same mistakes. Before long, the Blood Ravens chapter, obediently listening to Luo Sha's advice, immediately transferred and sealed a large number of demonic weapons and psychic knowledge into a transport ship. Luo Sha, who had completely freed himself, also silently thought about how to safely bring the entire Blood Ravens fleet back. After all, he had never tried it before, and he didn't know whether the warp gate he summoned could support such a large-scale transfer operation. Inside the ancient halls of the battle barge, omniscient mystery. Countless incense and burning candles illuminated everything around. Just below a towering statue of the Emperor, its face a blur. Loxia, clad only in a loose robe on his tall frame, maintained a kneeling posture. His solemn, bronze face remained in a state of closed-eyed prayer. Chiz chiz chiz. After an unknown duration, as a fleeting wisp of psychic flame flickered faintly between the Emperor's statues, the throne tokens, originally located inside the simulator's storage page, suddenly appeared out of thin air in front of Loxia. Slowly opening his eyes, Loxia gazed at the Emperor's statue, which had once again fallen into silence, and at the several throne tokens that had just landed in one of his palms. A faint smile emerged from the corner of his lips. So, I can expend multiple throne tokens to increase the size of each warp gate. Pity, the Emperor truly doesn't do losing trades. At this moment, Loxia, who had subconsciously sighed, pushed his tall frame up from the cold metal floor. Without turning his head, he turned and walked towards the outside of the ancient hall. Blood Raven Chapter Master Gabriel, Chief Librarian Orion, and others seemed to have been waiting outside the door for a long time. Upon hearing the sound of footsteps from inside the hall, they all drove their power armor to meet Loxia. Approximately several hours later, the last command issued by the Primarch was quickly transmitted to the interior of each ship. A large number of mortal crew members and Blood Ravens, who were already prepared, also entered a state of readiness. At the same time, dozens of metal ships, large and small, gradually adjusted their positions. They converged in the cold void into a defensive formation with very close spacing between them. Immediately afterward, a warp gate that suddenly appeared on the course ahead of the entire fleet began to grow from small to large. It rapidly expanded to a massive scale sufficient to accommodate the joint entry of all ships. And as the conspicuous trails of energy continued to eject outwards from the rear of each metal ship, the entire Blood Raven fleet slowly but firmly sailed into the interior of the warp gate. Forge World Triple Far. It has been about half a year since the last invasion of this place by the Chaos Demigods Omen Arc. Although the warp storm that enveloped the entire planet and surrounding worlds had long since dissipated, the Carcharodon's fleet, having completed the ship repair plan, remained in near-planetary orbit around the Forge World. And from time to time, it sent out a large number of small ships and Astartes to continuously salvage the Omen Arc, which had almost become a space hulk again, to obtain various recyclable resources. And as time continued to pass, the weapon arrays on a large number of Carcharodon's battleships always maintained an offensive posture towards the Forge World, capable of conducting large-scale orbital bombardments at any time. Moreover, no matter how Triple Far sent people to communicate with the Carcharodon's chapter, those ready to fire weapon arrays would not move even a fraction. In fact, the entire Carcharodon's fleet has now been temporarily divided into three factions. One faction is the Radical faction, led by Carcharodon's chapter Master Tyberos. Their desire to attack the Forge World Triple Far is growing day by day, and their attitude is becoming increasingly worse. If it weren't for the overwhelmed Lidustos constantly exerting pressure and persuasion on the other party in the name of the Primarch. Then a terrifying massacre of orbital bombardment followed by the landing of drop pods would probably be inevitable. The second faction is the Balancing faction, led by Lidustos and the Terminator Guard. They constantly act as various reconcilers between the Forge world and the Carcharodon's fleet, preventing irreparable bloodshed between the two sides. On the one hand, Lidustos deeply knows how important a sufficiently obedient Forge world is to the Primarch's many subsequent plans. Secondly, the Terminators of the Lamenters chapter and the Black Templars chapter believe that the Primarch will return from the Cold Void because they have been fighting alongside the Primarch for a long time. And the third faction, which has no sense of existence, is the more divided Raven Guard within the company. A small number of Raven Guard, led by two company champions, stood on the side of Carcharodon's chapter master Tyberos. They believe that if the Primarch cannot truly return, then the Forge World Triple Far and Lidustos need to give a clear explanation. And the two Raven Guard company commanders, who have a broader perspective. They believe that even if the Primarch is not present, all Astartes also need to uphold their respective beliefs and continue to fight for the future of the human empire. What's more, the Raven Guard of the past were already too familiar with special situations such as the disappearance of the Primarch. Therefore, most of the Raven Guard are proceeding in an orderly manner with the Forge World Triple Far as the center. Through the surrounding night worlds, they are re-establishing a vast intelligence network belonging to the Raven Guard throughout the Far East sector and even the Star region. To some extent, they are unwilling to get involved in the conflicts between the Forge World and the Carcharodon's chapter, represented by Forge General Wesley and Lidustos. But if a fierce battle to the death really breaks out between the two sides, the Raven Guard, who cannot be alone, will probably become a third force attacking both sides at the same time. Of course, all the root causes of the above problems. As long as the Primarch successfully returns to the fleet, it will instantly disappear. After all, everyone's starting point and standpoint are all for the Primarch. Buzz buzz buzz. Just as Tyberos and others were following their usual habit of conducting a yin and yang verbal battle through the common communication channel. With the psychic fluctuations that suddenly swept across the cold void, a large warp gate far exceeding normal size quietly appeared in the vicinity of the Space Hulk Omen Arc. By the time the quickly reacted Carcharodon's fleet and the Forge World's near-planetary orbital defense platform turned their weapon arrays used to defend against each other, intending to increase the level of alert. A total of dozens of massive fleets from unfamiliar Astartes chapters had slowly sailed out of the large warp gate, revealing those cold glowing metal ship hulls. At the same time, a deep voice that everyone was extremely familiar with also quickly echoed continuously throughout the cold void through full-channel broadcasting. This is Primarch Loxia, leading the Blood Raven chapter back to normal time. Everyone, you've waited long enough, I'm back. The return of the Primarch. Not only did it instantly reunite the Flesh-Tearers fleet, which had just begun to splinter into factions, but it also completely relieved the high adepts of the Forge World's Sacred Council and Forge Master Wesley, who resided within the palace. In any case, the oily old men of Triple Forge didn't want to bear the heavy burden of being responsible for the Primarch's unfortunate disappearance, becoming a thorn in the side and a pain in the flesh for many Astartes chapters. Boom, boom, boom. Accompanied by the deep rumble of the displacement engines, a red-painted Thunderhawk transport rapidly departed from the deck of the battle barge, carrying Rogel himself, as well as the Blood Ravens chapter command echelon, into the polluted atmosphere of the Forge world. After the Thunderhawk transport, with its landing gear slowly deployed, landed heavily. Before Rogel, clad in his Auramite power armor, could step out of the dimly lit interior of the aircraft. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Within his field of vision, barriers of blue light from teleportation technology began to flicker back and forth around the landing platform. In the next moment, Flesh-Tearers chapter master Tyberos, the Terminator Guard, and the Servo Skull Redditus, hovering in midair, all revealed their conspicuous figures of varying sizes in the air. Immediately afterward, just as a smile appeared on Rogel's lips, chapter master Tyberos and the Terminator Guard quickly activated their power armor, kneeling on one knee before Rogel, and began to beg forgiveness from the Primarch. However, Rogel, who never cared much about this, simply waved his hand. effectively dismissing the matter. Next, a large number of small shuttles began to appear in the sky above the crowd. More high adepts from the Forge world, clad in red robes, revealed their strange figures, coming to welcome Rogel's return in the name of Forge Master Wesley. After taking a deep breath, Rogel, in his power armor, went up to exchange brief greetings with the crowd, then immediately turned around and led them towards the private palace. Inside the private palace, with its brilliantly lit interior and decor characteristic of the Mechanicum, Rogel, with his arms outstretched, had a large number of automated servo robots quickly dismantling his Auramite power armor, while telling Reditus, hovering in midair, the areas that needed repair. After Rogel had completely removed his Auramite power armor, he began to introduce the members of the Blood Ravens chapter one by one to Tyberos and the others, who had remained silent all along. Soon after, as continuous shadows of Shadowstep suddenly bloomed in the surrounding air, 2 Raven Guard company captains also quickly arrived at this place, joining this temporarily convened round-table conference. While Tyberos and the others were cautiously engaging in chapter exchanges with the Blood Ravens, Reditus, with red light flashing in his eye sockets, quietly approached Rogel. The former recounted all the events that had occurred since the Primarch's departure in detail. "How is everyone's communication going? Now, let's temporarily shift your attention here, I have something to announce." At this moment, Rogel, squinting his eyes, finished listening to Reditus's report. He paused slightly, then immediately spoke to the surrounding crowd in a calm tone. "I heard that during my absence, all of you almost caused an internal strife for me. What, do you Astartes find the daily battles not intense enough, not exciting enough? Do you want to become even more recklessly rebellious chapters?" Rogel's indifferent words had just fallen. Tyberos, the largest in stature among the crowd, instantly knelt on one knee in front of Rogel without any hesitation, once again lowering his head. The 2 Raven Guard company captains glanced at each other, then they also knelt on one knee with helpless expressions, awaiting the Primarch's reprimand. "Tyberos, such is the nature of your Flesh-Tearers chapter, and I can't say much about it. After all, your loyalty to me, this Primarch, over the years has always been seen in my eyes and remembered in my heart. Moreover, I have no intention of keeping a group of bloodthirsty sharks locked in a cage called authority. Consider this a reminder from me. Next time the Flesh-Tearers make any important decisions, think carefully about the possible consequences of your actions. As for the Raven Guard, most of you did not rashly join the conflict between the 2 sides, which can be considered a wise choice. However, those 2 company champions who chose a radical stance, although I understand their actions, they will later be transferred back to the homeworld to listen to David's command. Don't misunderstand, this is not a punishment, just a small warning. In addition, our fleet is gradually increasing in both the number of ships and the number of chapters. For the convenience of future command, to exert greater effect, and to reduce conflicts between each other, I plan to formally establish my 22nd Legion, that is to say, all chapters that join my command are my gene sons, whether or not there is a connection of blood. At the same time, you chapter masters will also be demoted to company commanders of independent grand companies. The combat personnel within the original chapter will retain their previous honorary titles, while their ranks will be reduced accordingly. In addition, each grand company will coexist equally, without any class distinctions, only differences in their respective specialized combat functions. Although each chapter is demoted to an independent grand company, the internal command structure and chapter customs will be completely preserved. At the same time, there is no upper limit to the number of Astartes. In addition to the materials and resources that will be uniformly distributed by the Legion in the future, if you have your own methods and channels, then even if a grand company is stuffed with tens of thousands of people, becoming a 10,000-man band, I don't care, and even warmly welcome it. Now, do you all have any opinions or suggestions on this? If you don't speak up now, then once the basic structure of the Legion is established, it will be even more difficult to change. At this moment, Rogel's voice slowly echoed in everyone's ears. Just as the Astartes with various expressions were carefully considering the details of this matter, Gabriel, the chapter master from the Blood Ravens chapter, stepped forward in his power armor before Tyberos could rise. The entire Battle Brothers of the Blood Ravens chapter are willing to become the sons of the Primarch and contribute all the power of knowledge to the future of the 22nd Legion. Before his words could fall, Tiberos, who suddenly rose from the ground, also said loudly to Rogel in a deep voice. The Flesh-Tearers chapter never wants to lag behind. We are willing to obey any orders from the Primarch. The Raven Guard are willing to obey the Primarch's arrangements. The Lamenters. The Black Templars. Now, with the special opportunity of rectifying the fleet's internal affairs, Rorschach's long-conceived Primaris Legion was finally established. Former Carcharodon's chapter master Tiberos was immediately appointed by Rorschach as the lord of the Carcharodon's Grand Company within the Primaris Legion, leading 6 full-strength companies to continue fighting alongside the Primarch. Former Blood Ravens chapter, with Gabriel having just become chapter master a few days prior, was also immediately appointed by the Primarch as the lord of the Blood Ravens Grand Company within the Primaris Legion, leading 2 full-strength companies to join the Primarch's command. Former Raven Guard chapter, after careful discussion between the 2 shadow captains. The shadow captain named Master of Intrigue, Sir Ali, became the lord of the Raven Guard Grand Company within the Primaris Legion. The other shadow captain peacefully became his adjutant. As for the Lamenters and Black Templars chapters within the Terminator Guard, as well as the White Scars stationed on the homeworld, only the Lamenters, with their larger numbers that could muster 2 full-strength companies, could immediately support the basic structure of a Legion Grand Company. The remaining Astartes either hoped Rorschach would obtain their chapter's gene seed, or needed some luck to encounter their chapter's main force. Subsequently, Rorschach, who planned to rest for a short period, began discussing with Lehman Russ a series of arrangements regarding the internal resource allocation of the Legion. In the current situation, there was absolutely no need to worry about things like weapons, equipment, or heavy vehicles. The forges of the homeworld and the current forge world of Triplex Fal were sufficient to fully equip the Primaris Legion with the addition of more chapters. Therefore, continuing to increase the number of Astartes within each Grand Company became one of the partial task plans for the next stage. Besides continuing to gather people from past timelines, Rorschach also focused some of his attention on the methods and abilities of each Grand Company to recruit and create new blood. Judging from the current number of personnel alone, Tiberos's Carcharodon's Grand Company undoubtedly possessed the most Astartes. Currently, their internal company organization had expanded to the 6th company. If it weren't for the Carcharodon's own gene seed cultivation output not keeping up, and Tiberos not wanting to use the Night Lord's pure gene seed to make up the numbers, the 7th company could actually be formed. Next were the Blood Ravens, who possessed a mobile monastery fortress battle barge, and the Raven Guard, who possessed a batch of pure gene seed. Moreover, scattered within their companies, they could piece together quite a few apothecary brothers. They could launch recruitment and creation of new recruits anytime, anywhere. However, the Raven Guard were more inclined to select mortal warriors who inherently hated or despised evil from the depths of their hearts. While the Blood Ravens were more inclined to recruit mortals with psychic potential, in order to increase the number of librarious units. Therefore, with their greater pursuit of quality, it would be difficult for them to surpass the Carcharodons in terms of numbers in the short term. As for the Lamenters, Black Templars, or White Scars, who currently only had the basic framework of 1 Grand Company, the better choice for these veteran Astartes was to become a source for replenishing Rorschach's Terminator Guard. After all, without more gene seed output and the assistance of a large number of apothecary brothers from their own chapters, even if the homeworld had mastered the ability to perform gene modification surgery, it would be extremely difficult to increase their numbers. The secret establishment of the Primaris Legion did not seem to bring much change to the outsiders on the forge world of Triplex Fal. It was just that occasionally, meticulous tech priests inadvertently observed that, seemingly overnight, every Astartes chapter around them had slightly changed the position of their respective chapter badges. And they had also repainted a new but completely unfamiliar and mysterious emblem on their thick shoulder armor, with a golden background. A metallic cogwheel and an imperial double-headed eagle were auxiliary, coupled with a blood-red scythe and a warhammer entwined with shadows, crossed above. In this regard, some of the more flexible and intelligent members of the Adeptus Mechanicus vaguely guessed something from it. However, they didn't have any particularly special thoughts in their hearts. On the one hand, the deteriorating relationship between the Forge world and the Astartes chapters had just eased, and no one wanted to touch the mold now. On the other hand, it was also because the Primarch was the uncrowned king, the true controller of Triplex Fel. Whatever the other party wanted to do, as long as it wasn't blatant heretical behavior that betrayed the Imperium of Man and the Emperor, then let him do it. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, automated servitor robots were disassembling the set of adamantium power armor named Starlight Glory into 8 pieces around the forging platform. They were carrying out more detailed repair work according to the drawings and repair plans formulated by Lehman Russ. Dozens of meters away, Rorschach, wearing a set of loose robes, was talking to Lehman Russ, who was staying on the table. Speaking of which, I don't know how David is doing over there. If it weren't for the fact that the homeworld really can't be separated from people, I really wanted to bring David over to deal with these boring materials and trivial matters within the fleet. However, I am currently more concerned about the extent to which the personnel on the homeworld have mastered gene modification surgery. If everything goes smoothly on the homeworld, I plan to allow the 3 complete grand companies currently possessed by the Primaris Legion to try recruiting suitable new recruits on the homeworld. For example, can those messy superheroes meet the recruitment requirements of the Raven Guard, and can some mages who have been exposed to magic since childhood become recruitment targets for the Blood Ravens, and can mortal berserkers trained according to the methods of training Asgardian berserkers become new blood sources for the Carcharodons? Of course, if you want to fully guarantee the combat quality of the new recruits, you need to first select a large number of mortal elites from the local Defense Force Guard. Then directly select the mortal elites into the Stormtrooper Corps, and wait until their physical fitness and will have undergone numerous trials, injected with super soldier serum, and mastered the use of power armor and various weapons, plus the massive memory infusion of the knowledge crown. Will the success rate of performing gene modification surgery then be higher? Moreover, even if someone unfortunately fails during the lengthy process of modification surgery, then with the blessing of the panacea, I don't think it will cause a large number of casualties. In this way, those mortal elites who failed to modify can return to the Stormtrooper Corps and re-become elite stormtroopers whose combat effectiveness may be between the mortal auxiliary army and the Astartes. Lehman Russ, what do you think of my idea for this procedure? At this moment, Rorschach, who subconsciously moved his gaze away from the piles of parchment scrolls, spoke slowly. However, by the time the last syllable of his words gradually dissipated into the air, Rorschach, who had closed his eyes, did not hear the mechanical voice from Lehman Russ. To be honest, ever since Roth returned, he had vaguely felt that something was wrong with Reditus. But he couldn't quite put his finger on what exactly was wrong. Because it was entirely a sixth sense, an intuition brought to him by his incredibly sharp animal senses. Since he hadn't found any signs of chaos corruption on the servo skull, Roth had suppressed the idea of finding out what was going on. But now, Roth slowly opened his eyes and stared straight at Reditus, who seemed to be completely lost in a deep, otherworldly contemplation. Reditus seemed almost oblivious to all external communication. He couldn't help but take a deep breath, already planning to thoroughly investigate the matter. Pong. So, a thick-fingered hand from Roth gently tapped the yellowish bone skull of the servo skull, abruptly waking the other from his contemplation. Ah, sorry, Primarch, I accidentally spaced out. I might not have been resting well lately, please don't mind it. At this moment, the red light flickering in the eye sockets suddenly became active as Reditus hurriedly spoke in Roth's direction. Even its mechanical voice was filled with a hint of trying to cover something up. Roth subconsciously raised a hand, scratching his chin with several sharp fingertips, staring expressionlessly at Reditus close at hand, and said in a calm tone. Oh, how do I remember you complaining to me before, that aside from occasionally tinkering with automated servo robots for entertainment, you've almost lost the concept and state of being able to sleep and rest. In the end, how can you still be considered a living thing in the physical sense? Before Roth finished speaking, he raised 2 thick fingers again in front of Reditus, whose eye sockets were flashing red light back and forth. His other hand quietly took out the not-so-small furnace heart from the storage space and placed it directly under the servo skull's eyelids. Reditus, you still have 2 chances to deceive me, but my suggestion is, you better tell me what's on your mind. Tell me the truth, speak, you still have at least 3 sentences to say. At this moment, Reditus seemed to have forgotten that it could activate the anti-gravity engine to rise into the air. It was twitching back and forth on the table like an ant on a hot pan. Even the red light deep in its eye sockets was almost flashing with a dazzling, chaotic frequency. Respected Primarch, I haven't caused any major trouble recently, have I? Weren't the conflicts within our fleet also taken advantage of by you to carry out large-scale reorganizations? Oh, if you want to ask me about those times when I was still in the homeworld, I admit that I might have accidentally committed some small mistakes. You have 2 sentences left, Roth said calmly, shaking his head. The next second, Reditus, whose mechanical voice was filled with wailing, hurriedly shouted. I was wrong. I admit that I shouldn't have dismantled that hover motorcycle you placed deep in the Gemini Island base without authorization. But I later put all the parts back without any damage. I guarantee with my personality that there is absolutely no problem. HMPH, not this sentence either. Reditus's words were still echoing in the air. Roth, who couldn't help but take a deep breath, subconsciously tightened his grip on the metal handle of the furnace heart. But he immediately suppressed the many emotions in his heart and snorted coldly. Ah, respected Primarch, I also admit that my recent relationship with Forge General Wesley may not be clear, but neither of us are complete humans anymore, and I can swear to the Emperor that we are innocent. I also wanted to bridge the relationship between the 2 sides so that our Legion fleet could have a stable output Forge world in the dark side of the Empire. Tisk, Reditus, I see that you won't shed tears until you see the coffin. Do you really think you can deceive me with these ridiculous and clever tricks? Now, you have no chance to talk nonsense. If you don't tell me the truth, I won't execute you on the spot for the sake of Forge General Wesley, but you can go back to the homeworld and play with David. At this moment, Roth immediately pretended to get up and leave, putting away the furnace heart. Sure enough, Reditus, who was anxious, was fooled without any hesitation. It hurriedly activated the anti-gravity engine and rose into the air, circling around a few times. Only then did Reditus say to Roth beside him in a heavy tone. Primarch, I am unwilling to tell you the truth because these things are not good things, and may even bring more disasters. But since you insist on knowing, I personally have nothing that I can't say. It's just that the truth I know is only fragmented information pieced together. Wesley didn't fully explain it, and for my own good, completely deleted the memory module it had stored, but according to some vague data I captured, I may be Reditus but not Reditus. What does this mean? In layman's terms, when I was resurrected by the Emperor and thrown by your side, my entire soul may have been completely cleansed of its memory from the inside out, which means that the past I thought I knew was not as simple as I knew. Moreover, although Wesley repeatedly instructed me to remain anonymous and never continue to investigate this matter, I couldn't help but make some guesses. Perhaps when I was alive, I had a huge hatred with the Martian mechanicum that even 10,000 years could not erase, and I even guessed that I might have been some unknown being on the rebellious side. Primarch, what makes me most sad is not the unknown enemies, but that I want to openly land on Mars and become a highly respected Magos. This once reachable distant dream is now completely shattered. If my true identity is exposed, it is very likely to bring a lot of trouble to your Legion fleet and the Primarch's identity. At this moment, Reditus, who was in a state of loss, no longer had the activity and passion of the past. Its entire head lowered slightly and said in a low voice to Roth in front of it. However, at this time, Roth, whose originally furrowed brows gradually relaxed, shook his head slightly. He took a deep breath and said, I thought it was something amazing, so it turned out to be because of this. Reditus, don't tell me, you just listened to some unverifiable words from others, and subconsciously had a crisis of identity recognition, right? Primarch, I think you may not quite understand what kind of war heritage and capabilities the Martian mechanicum possesses. If they want to target us alone, Mars, how many chapters of Astartes can they mobilize? As a Primarch, I have countless Astartes as a strong backing. Also, do you think Primarch Guilliman, my regent brother, will watch the Martian mechanicum run wild? In terms of controlling his subordinates, he is probably the #1 among the Primarchs. Reditus, even if you really caused an irreparable disaster in the past, since the Emperor allowed you to assist me, it proves that your belief in will have completely passed her test. Let's put it this way, even if we Primarchs can't handle it, we still have the Emperor to back us up. So, what's there to be afraid of? If there's a chance, I'll personally take you to Mars, and even have them personally give you the title of Magos. At this moment, Reditus was naturally filled with an indescribable gratitude for Rock's comforting words and strong support. It had to drive the anti-gravity engine and circle back and forth in midair several times before its entire skull seemed to calm down. And perhaps it was because it had completely let go of the burden and anxiety deep in its soul. The servo-skull Reditus in Rock's memory quickly returned. Next, after a long conversation between the two sides, some ideas were also summarized. That is, in the short term, Reditus's true identity cannot be exposed at all. Not to mention that no one knows its true identity in the past, just a great rift that runs across most of the Empire's territory almost isolates the rapid flow of all intelligence information. As long as Reditus maintains the persona of a Mechanicus Magos who voluntarily follows the Primarch, it will be enough to solve many problems. It can be said that it is difficult to attract more attention from the Martian Mechanicum. However, Reditus also made a small suggestion to Rorschach. That is, if there is a mission to go to Mars after praying for support, then the Primarch must take it with him, even if it is to find out some things. In this regard, Rorschach, who pondered for a while, casually agreed. Soon after, Reditus, who had gradually regained his vitality, shifted most of his attention to the automatic servo robots that were repairing the adamantium power armor. In an instant, a large number of harsh reprimands and curses slowly resounded around. And Rorschach, who originally planned to continue dealing with the internal affairs of the fleet, also got up and left with a helpless expression. He really didn't want to continue to endure the noisy torture from the servo skull. If I had known this earlier, I might as well have let it maintain its previous half-dead state. After the dozens of metal ships of the Blood Raven cohort also completed maintenance and repairs on the forge world of Triplex fell. Countless survival resources and heavy vehicles and weapons manufactured by Triplex Fal began to be continuously transported to the transport ships inside the Legion fleet. Even though the Forge world is indeed a good place, Rock's entire fleet cannot stay here for a long time. Especially the intelligence network that the Dark Raven Guard cohort was previously expanding to other star regions. Currently, it has successfully collected more intelligence information. Although intelligence losses and delays may also be caused by warp storms. But for the Legion fleet today, it is undoubtedly a very huge help. And according to these summarized intelligence, in terms of the current situation of the Imperium Nihilus, the threat from the Chaos side has slightly decreased. However, the ravages of the Tyranids and the Orc began to show more consequences. After all, compared to the Chaos Demon's habit of pulling the fallen planets into the warp for slaughter and sacrifice, the Tyranids generally devour countless lives in an extermination manner, leaving only a barren planet without even minerals. And once the Orc successfully occupies a planet belonging to humans, their number will once again explode, forming more Orc fleets, spreading like constantly breeding viruses. According to some inside information obtained by the Dark Raven Guard, many Warlord-level Orcs are also constantly emerging in the Orc WAAAGH. So, whether Rorschach, who has just formed the Primarch's Legion, is willing or not, what he needs to face is an even more difficult and cruel battlefield than before. Even some planets that were temporarily abandoned during the fleet's previous cruise in order to reduce the loss of Astartes personnel. They must choose to either completely take them back or use exterminatus to solve the problem. Soon after, according to a series of orders from Rorschach, a Librarius squad from the Blood Raven cohort and a battle squad from the Dark Raven Guard were temporarily left on the Forge world of Triplex Fal. Their role, in addition to serving as transit points for various intelligence information, it is also to prevent Forge General Wesley from having other ideas after the Primarch's fleet leaves. Even though Reditus, wearing a miniature Knight Titan, repeatedly assured the Primarch, the people of Triplex Fal will definitely not have any disloyal intentions, and Forge General Wesley will definitely not become a heretic. But Rorschach also believes that this is just an insurance agreement used to appease people's hearts, and it is the same for both parties. As time goes by, after everything in the entire fleet was ready, the Primarch's fleet, with as many as hundreds of large and small ships, once again embarked on a long void cruise. And according to the general plan discussed by Rorschach and the cohort captains, the primary goal of the Primarch's fleet's next long-term stay will be located on the edge of the Ultima Segmentum and the Far East Fringe, belonging to Regent Guilliman's 500 Worlds of Ultramar. Even the intelligence information obtained by the Dark Raven Guard also shows. Most of the Indomitus Crusade fleets are engaged in long-term arduous battles inside the Segmentum Obscurus and the Ultima Segmentum, and Regent Guilliman himself is always in them. But Rock's fundamental purpose is not to cross the galaxy to meet this Primarch brother, but to see if he can get some Astartes from the Ultramarines chapter or successor chapters to use. It would be a double blessing if he could directly obtain the manufacturing technology of Primaris Space Marines. Of course, the premise of all this is that Rock's Primarch's fleet must suppress the various alien races inside the Far East Fringe to a certain extent before considering it. Otherwise, the difficult situation in the Imperium Nihilus will inevitably gradually deteriorate. Eventually, a series of terrible losses that are difficult to recover for the human empire will occur. Soon after, the huge Primarch fleet, which was sailing in the depths of the Cold Void, quickly launched an operation to basically screen the psychic distress information that could be received. And Roche and others will dispatch a suitable number of combat squads aboard Cobra-class destroyers according to the degree of crisis to provide necessary support, and also prepare a certain number of reserve squads to prevent unexpected situations. Subsequently, the first large-scale operation after the establishment of the Primarch's Legion. The mission target was locked on an Agri world invaded by the Orc. Carcharodon's chapter master Tiberos personally led a full-strength company, plus several Librarius squads from the Blood Raven cohort. Began a spectacular drop-pod assault towards the Agri world. And a large number of heavy vehicles and Thunderhawk gunship formations also cooperated with the Astartes landing operation under the command of Reditus. As for Roche himself, he did not join the battle after putting on his adamantium power armor again. Unless the invading Orc had an Orc warboss or an Orc warlord who was beyond normal specifications that even Tiberos and the others could not deal with. However, under normal circumstances, this is almost impossible. Especially for the brave and good at fighting Carcharodons, it is even more so. However, just as Roche was standing safely inside the bridge of the battle barge, while carefully watching the battle situation information constantly refreshed on a row of virtual screens, the black bracelet that he had always worn on his wrist, which could be used to contact other simulacrums, suddenly flashed a short and rapid eye-catching light. The upper deck cabin of the battle barge, Water Monster. Inside an ancient hall filled with bright light. Roach, clad in vibranium-powered armor, stood upright in the center. He took a deep breath, then slowly extended his thick arm, adorned with a black bracelet, forward. As the surrounding air rapidly cooled, an icy frost began to appear on the metal floor. Several librarians from the Blood Raven Great Company, along with Kahulanji, the chief librarian of the Man-Eater Shark Great Company, wore solemn expressions, cautiously unleashing the immense psychic energy within their towering bodies. Buzz buzz buzz. In the next second, as a large amount of psychic energy was continuously poured into the black bracelet on Roach's wrist. In the blink of an eye, strands of bizarre psychic light, mixed with red, blue, and green hues, burst forth into the vision of everyone present. However, before Roach, his brow slightly furrowed, could carefully read the important textual information that quickly coalesced from the bizarre psychic light in midair. Chi chi chi. Just a dozen meters away, above the metal floor, a webway portal with a diameter of nearly 3 meters suddenly materialized. All on guard. Protect the Primarch. At the same time, Gabriel and others, the company commander of the Blood Raven Great Company, who had been standing aside awaiting orders and watching the excitement, quickly gripped the bolters and melee weapons in their hands. The solemn-faced Blood Ravens surrounded the Primarch without hesitation, their gazes fixed warily on the direction of the portal. Dong dong dong. At this moment, a tall figure cloaked in a white hood, still carrying a giant sword wrapped in white bandages on his back, drove his dark green power armor, taking the lead to step out of the webway portal. Subsequently, the webway portal, its surface constantly reflecting the surrounding blurred scenery like a mirror, did not dissipate instantly. Instead, 2 more Astartes, also clad in dark green power armor, quickly stepped out. The pair of extremely conspicuous and flamboyant slender wings on either side of their metal helmets also allowed Roach, who had subconsciously narrowed his eyes, to instantly recognize their true identities. Dark Angels. I say, brother, don't tell me you've been captured by the lunatics of the inner circle. Now you're running to me, the Primarch, to help you out of trouble. At this moment, Roach, taking a deep breath, slowly activated his vibranium power armor and stepped forward. As he spoke, he casually patted those beside him who couldn't help but widen their eyes. Gabriel and the others were temporarily mind-locked because of the two identical Primarch adults. They are not the lunatics of the inner circle, but our own people, the so-called fallen angels. Oh, new Astartes. The Blood Raven chapters lads. Looks like you've upgraded your gear, my Primarch brother. As soon as the words fell, Cypher Roach slowly lifted the white hood covering his head. He opened his thick arms with a smile on his face, stepping forward to greet Primarch Roach. Long time no see. Long time no see. Primarch Roach, with a helpless expression, gave him a hearty hug. He then gazed at the other party with a puzzled look, asking, brother, according to what you told me before, doesn't the red light of the black bracelet represent a distress signal from the wolf cub's side? Why is it you who have come now? Hearing Primarch Roach's inquiry, Cypher Roach, with a solemn expression, shook his head slightly, sighing as he said, who told that wolf cub, favored by Khorne, to never learn to use psychic powers? Moreover, the Astartes under his command now are all werewolves who used to belong to the Space Wolves' 13th Great Company. It's a cause for celebration that these brothers, who have unfortunately undergone gene mutation, can maintain basic awareness. As for recruiting librarians, don't even think about it. And I happen to be able to use some very subtle tricks to keep a long-term eye on the wolf cub's specific situation. Don't look at me like that, your black bracelet doesn't have this function, I trust you completely, this is a special function specifically set up for the wolf cub. To be honest, this request for help was also initiated by me in the wolf cub's name, behind his back. Otherwise, according to his personality, he would rather lead his subordinates to fight to the death than bother us. At this moment, as Cypher Roach's words fell, Roach, shaking his head involuntarily, unintentionally turned his gaze to the two towering fallen angels. In the next moment, the fallen angels, who had been observing the surrounding environment and the Astartes, knelt on one knee towards Primarch Roach almost simultaneously, their voices low and joyful as they said, Sons of Lionel Johnson greet the Primarch. Rise, children of the Lion, before your Primarch officially returns to the Imperium, I'm afraid you will need to endure a period of difficult days. Roach, narrowing his eyes, gazed at the two tormented but still loyal fallen angels, saying in a heavy tone. Then, his thoughts turning, he suddenly reached out and pulled the Cypher Lord in front of him, walking to a more secluded corner of the ancient hall, and quietly inquired about the Lionel Johnson's situation. However, at this moment, a fleeting wry smile unconsciously appeared on Cypher Lord's face. He took a deep breath, explaining to Primarch Roach in brief words. In the past period of time, he had ventured into the depths of the Dark Angels Chapter's fortress monastery, the Rock, at great risk. But despite causing a great disturbance, he had not discovered the Lionel Johnson's specific whereabouts. And according to the cryptic and vague words of those Dark Watchers, the mysterious green-robed figures, the Lionel Johnson's true slumbering place was not in the fortress monastery, the Rock at all. Or rather, even if it had existed 10,000 years ago, it had long been transferred out by the Emperor after careful consideration. Otherwise, the terrifying inner circle of the Dark Angels chapter would not have developed to such a frenzied state today. After all, the bloodline connection between Gene Sons and Gene Sires is a link that can never be erased. It seems that the Emperor has always maintained a certain degree of attention on the Lion. Well, he is, after all, the eldest brother among all the Gene Sires. Then continue to work hard, perhaps when the time is right, the Emperor will give you some psychic prophecies or the like, then we will take action together, and there will definitely be no trouble. At this moment, Primarch Roach patted Cypher Roach's heavy shoulder armor, saying in a deep voice. By the way, now you can tell me, what exactly is the situation that the wolf cub has encountered? I need to see how many Astartes to lead to provide support. Oh, speaking of which, it's not too serious. He and his company of werewolves were personally cornered in the Eye of Terror by the schemer Demon Prince, ascended Primarch Magnus. Quote. The Eye of Terror is a massive warp rift that has existed for far longer than the Great Rift. Its size and notoriety are unmatched in the entire galaxy. The Eye of Terror's origins can be traced back tens of thousands of years to the destruction of the ancient Eldar Empire and the birth cry of the chaos god Slaanesh. Most importantly, the mysterious and treacherous warp broke through the veil here, constantly intertwining and coexisting with the physical reality. It is like a terrifying scar that suddenly appeared in the cold galaxy, constantly leaking seemingly endless, pure, and primordial chaos energy. This incredibly unique geographical environment has made the entire Eye of Terror and its surroundings the most active forbidden zone for the forces of chaos. Before the fall of Cadia, the gate guarding the Imperium, and the eventual formation of the Great Rift that bisects the Imperium, the Eye of Terror has always been a haven for those evil traitors and chaos cultists who evade imperial judgment. Even for those traitor legions and warbands, the Eye of Terror has been their place of exile and refuge for 10,000 years. Now, according to Cypher's account, they must enter the Eye of Terror to rescue the space wolf Leman Russ, who has been besieged for a long time, from the demon Primarch Magnus. In the following period, the Primarch Leman Russ, in order to end the large-scale war in which the Legion fleet was fighting against the invading orcs as soon as possible, in addition to having the other full-strength companies of the Carcharodon's Astra deployed to the ground battlefield, one after another, huge battleships gradually descended into the near-Earth orbit above the agricultural world, and quickly launched a series of orbital bombardments like divine punishment towards the most densely populated areas of the orcs. Before long, as the news of Tyberos successfully beheading the orc warboss in the orc forces resounded throughout the ground battlefield, the Astartes of the entire Carcharodon's Astra quickly surrounded the chaotic orcs. They used the orbital bombardment from above, and a large number of heavy vehicles everywhere, commanded by Lydastus, to eliminate this group of orcs invading this place at the fastest speed. And when the entire war gradually came to an end, Cypher and the Primarch Leman Russ, who were inside the battle barge, also began to discuss the next rescue operation. First of all, the Legion fleet in the hands of the Primarch must not be taken to the Eye of Terror. On the one hand, for all Imperial ships, it is easy to enter the Eye of Terror, but difficult to get out. Not to mention the special nature of the warp itself, just the ubiquitous chaos power that corrupts countless mortal crew members and even Astartes is difficult to prevent. Even if the entire fleet activates the Geller field in advance, it cannot guarantee 100% safety. On the other hand, it is also because Cypher has carefully considered the Chaos God's continued attention to the Primarch Leman Russ. A Primarch entering the Eye of Terror will inevitably cause some chain reactions. If there is any unexpected error in the entire plan, then the fleet that Primarch Leman Russ has painstakingly accumulated over the years may disappear in an instant. Therefore, Cypher and Primarch Leman Russ jointly decided, the Legion fleet will continue to cruise according to the series of plans formulated before, and maintain the rescue operation to the Far East Frontier Star area. Moreover, in order to facilitate their escape from the Eye of Terror quickly through the warp gate after rescuing the Space Wolves Primarch, the number of Astartes that can be taken on this rescue operation should not be too many. In the end, Cypher and the three fallen angels, plus Primarch Leman Russ's Terminator Guard, in addition to a part of the Librarians from the Blood Ravens chapter and a part of the Battle Brothers from the Raven Guard chapter, they jointly formed a rescue team of about 100 people. And when the rescue team began to prepare weapons and ammunition, Primarch Leman Russ also called Gabriel, Orin, Tyberos, Kahulanchi and even Lydastus and others together. He instructed the crowd in front of him in a low voice that before they returned successfully, the entire Legion fleet must continue to operate according to the established plan. And Leman Russ also did not want to see the previous contradictions and factions reappear within the Legion. And after the crowd in front of him almost unanimously made the necessary guarantees to Primarch Leman Russ, taking a deep breath, Leman Russ immediately drove the Oramite power armor and turned to walk towards where Cypher was. Soon after, as a webway portal with a diameter of several meters silently appeared above the metal floor of the battle barge. Under the silent gaze of one fully armed Astartes after another, Primarch Leman Russ, holding the Blood Reaper and the Malleus, and Cypher, carrying the White Tiger Dao on his shoulder armor, took the lead and rushed into the webway portal. Eye of Terror, inside an unnamed planet. Hiss. The pale-faced space wolves Primarch Leman Russ slowly opened his bloodshot scarlet eyes. Leaning his spine against the side of the cold rock, He gritted his teeth and used his black ceramite palm, covered with fine cracks. He rubbed his half-healed face back and forth, and he faintly sucked in a breath of cold air between his sharp canine teeth. About dozens of hours or longer ago, the Space Wolves Primarch Leman Russ had just had an extremely fierce formal confrontation with the demon Prince Magnus. He forcibly withstood the almost endless psychic witchcraft around him, and forcibly chopped at the opponent with an axe. Of course, Leman Russ paid a heavy price for this. In addition to his entire person falling into a state of serious injury and unconsciousness, he also implicated a dozen Space Wolves brothers who sacrificed their lives to cover the retreat of the entire company. This undoubtedly made the already small 13th Company even worse. Roar. At this moment, a tall Space Wolves wearing broken power armor crawled out from behind a craggy boulder, and came to Leman Russ's vicinity. It sniffed back and forth, and then let out a low roar towards Leman Russ, deliberately lowering its voice. "It's okay, I can't die for the time being, that red Ogren hasn't caught up yet, right? Let the brothers clean up as soon as possible and prepare to transfer positions. Doesn't it like to play cat and mouse with us? Then let's play it to the end." Roar. "Don't worry, brother, even if I die in battle, I won't use that demon sword to summon the Khorne demon army, that's a road of no return. It's just that I didn't expect that just occasionally peeking at the periphery of the crystal labyrinth of the Changer of Ways would lead to encountering Magnus. Damn it, I couldn't get rid of the opponent by using the space-time chaotic warp characteristics before. It must be the damn Changer of Ways who is secretly plotting against us. I will bring more helpers to besiege her territory sooner or later. Smash her palace." At this moment, Leman Russ, taking a deep breath, scolded in a low voice. Buzzing buzzing. However, at this moment, Leman Russ's voice had not yet fallen. On the red barren ground nearby, which was full of craggy boulders, a chaotic warp psychic wave suddenly rose. In the blink of an eye, 1,000 Suns rubric marine after another suddenly revealed their extremely conspicuous tall figures, holding power staves or heavy weapons. At the same time, a large number of subhuman Tzeentch cultists wielding demon blades in their palms. Zongers with horns and pointed mouths also densely emerged between the barren ground within a kilometer radius. At that moment, Leman Russ, who had been sitting on the ground, quickly activated his artificer power armor, its ceramite plating covered in cracks, and leapt to his feet. He abruptly extended a ceramite hand and firmly grasped the frost axe from the nearby rubble, its sharp blade glinting with a frigid light. Then, Leman Russ, his gaze sweeping back and forth, fixed his eyes on the Red Tide warriors clad in blue and gold power armor, and muttered, "Red Tide warriors, Magnus's blades. Just a bunch of soulless power armor puppets." The next second, even before Leman Russ could issue a necessary warning. Chirr chirr chirr, accompanied by a series of ear-splitting scratching sounds as sharp claws scraped against the jagged rocks. Hundreds of burly, towering space wolves swiftly emerged from their hiding places among the rubble. They raised their heads and emitted a desolate and drawn-out howl, then, without any hesitation, launched a swift and agile assault on the advancing Zongers and Red Tide warriors. At the same time, Leman Russ, reactivating his artificer power armor, immediately engaged his magnetic boots and forcefully swung the frost axe in his grasp. He charged toward the nearest Red Tide warrior with unstoppable ferocity, like an ironclad train. Truth be told, as long as Demon Prince Magnus himself didn't personally enter the fray. Then neither the Space Wolves of the 13th Great Company nor Leman Russ himself were too concerned about any enemy attacks. Even if these Red Tide warriors, known as Magnus's blades, to some extent bore parts of Magnus's will as soulless puppets, essentially being chaos puppets directly controlled by him. Thud thud thud. Magnetic boots stomping back and forth kicked up puffs of crimson dust on the desolate ground saturated with chaos energy. With a grim expression, Leman Russ rapidly swung the frost axe in his grasp, heavily sweeping the sharp blade toward a Red Tide warrior wielding a warp flamer. Thwack! Immediately afterward, Leman Russ, rapidly shifting his footing, first dodged the incoming volleys of warp fire. Then, with just a single strike, he cleaved the warp flamer wielding Red Tide warrior in two at the waist. Simultaneously, Space Wolves warriors wielding frost claws charged into the depths of the Zonger ranks with a speed far exceeding that of ordinary Astartes. Each time those sharp claws danced through the air, a Zonger would unfortunately become a victim beneath their claws. Rumble, rumble, rumble. As waves of chaos psychic energy surged, red tide warriors clutching power staves lunged forward with the howling wind. They began to unleash awe-inspiring and terrifying psychic sorceries upon the charging space wolves. In the blink of an eye, a great amount of psychic lightning and roaring psychic flames burst forth in the air. Or psychic curses that could weaken combat will in charging speed rained down, completely engulfing the battlefield. However, these mutated space wolves could withstand most of the terrifying damage from the psychic sorceries in a short period of time thanks to their physical strength and more agile dodging speed. This also gave Leman Russ, who was shifting his attack direction, a golden opportunity to launch a sneak attack from the flank on the Red Tide warriors who had formed an offensive formation. Thud thud thud. The next moment, Leman Russ, relentlessly swinging the frost axe in his grasp, fiercely weaved through the ranks of the Zongers. As the sharp blade swept around, countless viscous scarlet blood repeatedly splattered onto the cracked ceramite armor, almost re-dyeing his gray-white long hair blood red. Chur chur chur. While charging, Leman Russ endured a direct hit from psychic lightning by relying on his physical strength and the defensive power of his ceramite armor. His crimson long hair instantly dried up and smoked, and he couldn't help but let out a deafening roar from deep within his throat. He immediately quickened his pace and arrived directly in front of the Red Tide warriors. Boom boom boom. Even these Red Tide warriors, personally controlled by Magnus's will, could hardly withstand Leman Russ's ferocious assault. The frost axe swung back and forth with ease, accompanied by the howling wind. Either heavily hacking the Red Tide warriors nearby to the ground or directly cleaving them in two. And the psychic sorceries that bloomed in the air gradually lost their damaging effect as Leman Russ fully entered a state of slaughter. As if an invisible psychic defensive barrier had completely enveloped his towering body. However, at this moment, just as the situation on the entire battlefield was tilting toward Leman Russ's side. HMPH. Accompanied by a low, cold sneer that suddenly appeared in everyone's ears. A mysterious psychic sorcery with chaos psychic fluctuations far exceeding those of the past rapidly swept across the entire battlefield. In an instant, the Red Tide warriors who had been completely terminated by Leman Russ actually rose from the ground again. Looking around, even the power armor on their bodies, which had been shattered and broken, was instantly restored to its original state. Magnus. At this moment, Leman Russ, clenching his teeth tightly, suddenly widened his blood-red eyes. He subconsciously let out an angry roar that echoed around him. Immediately afterward, Leman Russ, after glancing around at the situation on the battlefield, issued an order to the space wolves who were repeatedly charging back and forth to retreat and break out of the encirclement. If it were just Leman Russ himself at the moment, he would fight Magnus to the end even if he died on the spot. But unfortunately, the current Leman Russ is not only an Astartes deeply favored by Khorne but also the Great Wolf of the Space Wolves' 13th Great Company. He must consider the lives of these space wolves, rather than simply venting the infinite anger and burning desire for battle deep within his heart. Thud thud thud. At this moment, Leman Russ, once again forcefully swinging the frost axe, began to desperately carve out a path of blood on the chaotic battlefield for the other space wolves. Relying on his own resistance to psychic sorcery damage, he repeatedly cleaved the most threatening Red Tide warriors, temporarily delaying their encirclement and suppression of the space wolves. Buzz buzz buzz. However, at this moment, when Leman Russ, who was holding the rear, had created some distance between himself and the space wolves. Chains of sorcery, condensed from the scarlet blood of a large number of Zongers mixed with chaos psychic energy, suddenly emerged from the depths of the desolate ground around Leman Russ and rapidly bound his towering body. Even though Leman Russ, gritting his teeth, tried his best to unleash the terrifying power of his entire body to break free, he was unable to escape the shackles in a short period of time. Just as the wild wolf Loxia was firmly trapped in place. When his entire tall body was completely unable to move. Accompanied by bursts of terrifying chaos psychic energy sweeping in from all directions in the surrounding thin air. Those werewolf brothers who were quickly retreating from the battlefield were also quickly stopped by giant hands of mud that suddenly condensed from the depths of the barren ground. And many werewolf brothers who had temporarily lost their minds because their company commander was trapped, didn't even have time to move and dodge before they were tightly grasped in the depths of the huge palms by the giant mud hands. Even including the power armor on their bodies that was already fragmented, they were forcibly crushed into piles of scarlet flesh mud that splashed everywhere. Magnus. At this moment, Wild Wolf Loxia, who witnessed the unfortunate death of some werewolf brothers, once again let out an angry roar that resounded around him. And with his increasingly blood-red wolf pupils, and the faint buzzing emanating from the cornate demon sword behind his waist, those blood magic chains that were constantly wrapped around his tall body were also expanding and contracting back and forth with the gradually intensifying struggle. As if in the next second, Wild Wolf Loxia's rapidly increasing physical strength would forcibly break them. Hee. However, at this moment, a scarlet hand suddenly appeared in midair, with wisps of pure chaos psychic energy visible to the naked eye wrapped around its 5 sharp fingertips. Then, it pressed down on the top of Wild Wolf Loxia's blood-red hair, directly pinching his entire head, instantly making it impossible for him to struggle at all. "Weren't you calling me? I'm here now. Angry. Heartbroken. Watching your Astartes brothers being constantly abused and killed by me, do you feel powerless? But when you barbarians, the space wolves, burned my Prospero and wantonly slaughtered my 1,000 sons, did you feel the same way? Tisk tisk tisk, I unparalleled like your unyielding eyes, even when death is imminent. I will definitely extract your complete soul, and then seal it in these blood-red wolf pupils, so that it will always be with me. Because it seems that only in this way can I completely alleviate my years of disgust and hatred for you. My damned Primarch brother." As the deep voice echoed. A red giant about 9 meters tall, with a pair of huge blue wings extending from his broad back, casually lifted the completely immobile Wild Wolf Loxia into the air. The other party shook his scarlet face with twisted horns growing on his forehead, and his only remaining giant eye stared intently at Wild Wolf Loxia, whose eyes were full of anger and killing intent. "Oh, poor wolf cub, I also know that you are not a true Primarch, you are just a fragment of his soul that was accidentally stripped away. But who asked you to be unlucky and be met by me? And facing a soul fragment that is so bright and even close to complete, it is enough for me to send that Primarch brother a chaos curse gift. Of course, before that, I will also let you watch your Astartes brothers die one by one before your eyes." At this moment, the red sorcerer Magnus, with an extremely satisfied expression, couldn't help but reveal a hideous smile full of malice from the corner of his mouth. His only eye seemed to have foreseen through terrifying psychic energy that illusory scene in the future where he was the ultimate victor. Buzz buzz buzz. However, at this moment, just as the other party's words fell, when the whole person was still immersed in the exploration and enjoyment of the psychic prophecy, on the barren ground several kilometers away, a webway portal with a diameter of several meters suddenly appeared in the red sorcerer Magnus's only eye view. Dong dong dong. Immediately afterwards, a tall figure wearing a set of light gold power armor with huge metal wings, holding a scythe and a warhammer in his palms respectively, quickly rushed into this chaotic space full of chaos psychic energy. In the next second, another dark green power armor with a white hood draped over it, and a mysterious greatsword exuding endless threat on its back. A tall figure with a power greatsword on his thick shoulder armor also quickly stepped into this place. "Huh, it's actually you." At this moment, the red sorcerer Magnus, who subconsciously let out an angry low roar, suddenly widened his only eye. He seemed to be completely attracted by the sudden appearance of Primarch Loxia, and even casually threw away the Wild Wolf Loxia bound in his palm. And between the other huge scarlet hands, a thick magic book that was only the size of a mortal suddenly appeared out of thin air. Chi chi chi. In an instant, accompanied by a wave of terrifying psychic energy fluctuations that swept across most of the nameless planet and completely turned the red sky above this place. Streams of various chaos witchcraft that suddenly bloomed in midair, like a torrential rain, bombarded towards the direction where Primarch Loxia and others were located. Even those blades of Magnus who were besieging the werewolf brothers also suddenly changed direction and charged towards the new battlefield. Buzz buzz buzz. Almost at the same time, metal 10 rings with purple light and buzzing sounds suddenly detached from Primarch Loxia's power armor and began to spin back and forth rapidly above the webway portal. And in the blink of an eye, they formed layers of airtight metal spiral storms, trying to block the impact of the seemingly endless chaos witchcraft on the webway portal. Dong dong dong. After about dozens of Terminator guards wielding heavy weapons such as assault cannons took the lead in stepping into this place, Primarch Loxia launched a combat charge towards the Red Sorcerer Magnus without any hesitation. A psychic ray that cut through the air suddenly bloomed forward from the top of the light gold skull helmet, quickly swept back and forth between the Red Sorcerer Magnus's huge body. When Primarch Loxia, who was continuing to charge, instantly transformed the vibranium wings on his back into propulsion devices, wanting to shorten the distance with the Red Sorcerer Magnus as soon as possible. Sever Loxia, who was carrying the White Tiger greatsword on his shoulder armor, also suddenly raised a ceramic steel palm. He firmly grasped the space-time crystal located inside the breastplate. Then, Sever Loxia activated the largest bullet time in history with a painful and twisted expression. In the next second, layers of invisible time force field quickly enveloped the Red Sorcerer Magnus's huge body, and completely slowed down any of his movements. At this moment, within a radius of 1 kilometer, the chaos witchcraft that was constantly blooming was also temporarily stagnated in midair, as if it was wrapped in a gorgeous firework inside transparent colored glaze. In an instant, Wild Wolf Loxia, who seemed to be unaffected in any way and instead struggled to break free from the shackles of the witchcraft chain, also clenched the frost great axe in his palm. He coincided with Sever Loxia, who was launching a rapid charge, and Primarch Loxia, who was entering a low-altitude dive, and charged head-on towards the immobile Red Sorcerer Magnus. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.